And we've heard some answers, but I don't think I have heard an entirely complete consensus on that, and that is something we need to discuss and be aware of as we go through here, is that when we get to the end of this project, you know, what is the message that the committee wants to deliver, and how does that need to be framed, and what are the objectives? Because there are, obviously, we've got a committee, everyone has different perspectives and agendas and ideas about what's important. And
I'm just imagining a water-short region being told that if they just tried harder, to do more with less, they might not find that answer compelling.
right.
So I think I will speak for Maureen and hearken way back when we first started this process. And so I would say that I do not believe that this process started with an end outcome in sight, other than having, for all of the planning areas, identifying augmentation opportunities and or opportunities for things that are not necessarily augmentation that have been pulled out in these front four. With the
So just tools to meet
yes,
demand.
yes. And then, although it wasn't incorporated in this project as it went to the consultant, that the next step of this would be sharing of this information with the planning areas, not in the direction of being prescriptive, but just to say, this is done and this is what we've identified as possibly available to you. Anybody else who's been here from the very beginning that would like to chime in and say that we thought something different as compared to the DSAL committee, which actually their goal was to work through a process and come up with a project and move a project forward. That was not my recollection of what the intent of this process was.
I appreciate that. And then with that in mind, when you're talking about what a community might choose to do in the near term, it may not be a least cost thinking process. So again, a rural community with a source of, any community with a source of supply available to it may develop that local source of supply, whether it's the least cost or not. And so I'd be cautious of framing a statement about brackish groundwater desal along the lines of it won't come to fruition until much later because of these other lower cost alternatives. Just ask you to think about that.
Yeah, I understand that perspective, and the reason that I made that statement, most of my work is for municipalities and helping them to master plan and develop supplies and plan infrastructure for that and so on. And cost is always on the top of their list. It's not the only one, but
I think
it is very high on that.
A significant pivot in how we characterize costs, and when you introduce reliability and sort of local control, and I only mean that in sort of manifest destiny sort of ways, I think people are going to think differently about a straight-up cost assessment. Because when you start factoring in risk, uncertainty, reliability, a number of these options pencil out differently.
Right.
That's just one perspective on a committee.
Okay. Any other questions before we move forward?
Thank you.
And one thing that since I haven't met some of you before, I don't have a perspective on how much you've been able to read up on the materials we've sent out, and so I don't know if we need to backtrack in some areas or just move forward what we've got. Okay.
Bruce and Chuck will let you know. They'll let you know.
Well, Wade, has really helped me come out of my shell. I used to be shy.
So is the suggestion maybe we go through each one?
Yeah.
Just go through it? We've got 4 hours, right?
Yeah, that was the hope, is to quickly go
Why don't we
through
do
each
that?
one and have you look at it and provide whatever feedback you want.
Yeah, that's right.
So are we on project 1?
Yes, this is Project 1, Municipal Water Conservation.
My only question is why 120 gallons per capita per day? And there are towns that are a lot
Me too.
lower, and 120 is actually, for residential use, I think Phoenix is pretty close to that, so. Could we, is there any reason why we couldn't go lower?
That number is somewhat arbitrary, of course we can go lower. The reason I set that was that because if you have someone that's 120 or less, or 100, or even 95, we know some municipalities are that low, the opportunity for them to gain much from water conservation is much lower. Whereas if you have a community where the GPCD is 180, there's a lot more opportunity for them to get some benefits from conservation, so.
My hesitance, I have kind of the reverse feeling of, I'm not sure we want to
say a number.
A specific number. I think it's important to note that conservation can be used in as a demand management and can help defer water resource and infrastructure capital costs. When we say that the water yield, from 180 to 120 saves a third of the water demand, that's not something that's going to happen overnight unless you are saying you must curtail your water use. And so so I'm not sure quite how to say this.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that reducing your water demand can be beneficial in the long run, but I'm concerned about this being used to suggest, that's all we have to do, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I also don't want it to be used against areas that have been working on this for a long time, and because of their own individual community choices, maybe a little bit above 120. So
I think you also need to think about, I agree with you, and given the diversity of GPCD in Arizona, small systems in rural areas generally have much lower GPCD than urban areas because of cost and largely because of cost. And outdoor water being a different ethic in areas where it might rain and interest more. I'm thinking of the upper San Pedro, for example, where we know that small groundwater-based systems have GPCD well below 90 in many cases. So I think caution around a number. I would also characterize the time frame. So the water yield and the time frame, I know you're trying to create a very punchy sort of statement without a lot of nuance. The water yield from community conservation, it depends on what is being applied. And I don't think we want to create disincentives or mischaracterize community education is an important component of water conservation that doesn't generate that doesn't yield it's hard to quantify the yield. And certainly AMWA is a regional to national expert in how to communicate these things. And so that quantification is not going to be a third unless you're ripping out turf.
Yeah, you've still got a lot of turf to do that. Well, I have no problem with not putting a number in there. I just want to say, and this is a general statement that applies to all of these, on the one hand, we want wording that is helpful and constructive there is some push to have things be quantified so we can measure and know what we have, yet not say something that offends or distracts, or someone looks at it and says it doesn't apply to me.
Right.
So,
I think, and Chuck mentioned this up front, conservation and some of these other items are important when it comes to managing your system to ensure that you're using your water as efficiently as possible when it comes to augmentation. But I would hate the reader to think that we're focusing in on conservation and some of these other programs when really the focus of this report is on augmentation. So in my opinion, I think these are things you should do regardless, and you can do it anywhere in the state. There's an item here missing for the rural systems that I think needs to be incorporated, and that's the fact that many of these rural systems are very leaky. They don't have the capital improvements associated with it. You got just, I think, general terminology about conservation, how important that is in rural areas where it applies, and also to some of the urban areas. But as Warren mentioned, urban areas have been very, very active and effective in doing the conservation and employing conservation. So I don't want the reader to think when they get in here you have like 3 to 4 pages on conservation, and this really isn't a conservation study. This is more of, these are the right things to do, and we're saying this up front because, you should be employing these things. I'd rather see more focus and concentration on augmentation and some of the augmentation initiatives.
I also think generally, thinking about conservation, I think we should not think of it as that water use is high and could be reduced. It's that there are efficiencies for reducing consumption that will stretch supplies.
Exactly.
So we don't want to have a normative idea that this is high water use and it needs to be lower. So, but I also think, I like how you said, Richard, in the first paragraph, you highlighted pipeline leaks. I don't know exactly who the audience is for this, but maybe pulling out as bullet points and saying there's system conservation, like what Bruce just talked about.
Water loss.
And that water loss reduction, and then there's residential, there's user side conservation, and maybe bullet those.
okay.
And if any emphasis on water loss control for the system would be, I think, really valuable for a lot of these areas outside of the urban areas, the more rural. And then on the applicability, I'm wondering, again, this is something that really should be considered by any municipality that is wanting to look at more efficient use of their water, rather than just saying, well, if you're at 120, you should be looking at it, or, I think something needs to be said where it is an opportunity for any municipality to consider it.
Or a private water provider. It's pretty much applicable everywhere.
Private
in fact,
or
we could
public.
just say applicable everywhere, because it's also applicable at the
individual well.
At the individual well owner level, So.
So you're reworking.
Okay.
And also, I think the overall theme in this section, as I was reading through it, you get the impression that we aren't doing any of these things, and Arizona, in many ways, is a leader in some of these areas, reclaimed water use, conservation, and it might behoove us to recognize, successes, what other organizations have done to help educate maybe some of the rural folks, and here's some things that you could do potentially. This is what we have been doing. We need to continue doing it. Maybe we could even get a little bit better at it. So,
Are you suggesting perhaps we need another slot that says current applications?
well, I'm just thinking that this whole section, in my opinion, is more of a recognition that these are things that you need to do, but they're really not augmentation programs. And use it as an opportunity to say, Arizona's done a great job in conservation, we can do more. And it may not follow the same format as the rest of these augmentation projects. Because the way I view this is really a recognition that, these are things we can do, and some of the rural areas might be able to adopt some of these items, and we should consider that. But as I read through this, especially this section, I kept thinking to myself, my God, we're doing a lot of this. A lot of this is occurring.
I guess my concern is how do we get that in here?
Well, and then when you just said this is too much already, and so
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's the tension that I have with everything that's in this
Yeah.
front section, is how do you say enough, but you don't say too much?
Right.
And so I think breaking it down and making it look like everybody else is the way to not say too much. But, like even in this definition where there are some specific things, those are only an iota of hundreds of other things. So I think those specific examples probably shouldn't be in here, but just as Warren said, system conservation, in-home conservation, I mean, just those big things. And then where we could address what you're talking about, Bruce, is on the links at the back where it's reference materials. We just load up there. I mean, right now there could be DWR things, but there could be NWA things,
Yeah.
there could be references to all kinds of things, because it's one of those things, we could do a master's thesis on it, or we could just do it enough.
Yeah, and I wasn't thinking in those terms,
I
but.
think we should just do it enough to mention it.
Bruce was thinking more doctoral.
Another thing is that there's going to be text in the report as well, and we can certainly address.
Right, exactly.
And set the tone for that in
Exactly.
text and explain.
It's important.
This doesn't mean that we're
Right.
not doing it, but we've done many things, but here's some more.
Agreed. Yep.
You know, this is an idea, and if we've already discussed it, I apologize. I know that we have debated about the conservation and how to include it into this report a number of times, and we've wrestled with what's the right approach. And I think we're getting a lot closer to, it's starting to feel like it's coming together in a positive way. What I'm wondering is if, as a kind of just a little shift in the report when it's actually done, is to move the conservation part to the end, so that we avoid the perception at the beginning of, wait, why is conservation here? This is supposed to be on augmentation. These are all augmentation projects. We could go through all of the what we normally think of as augmentation, and then have the conservation at the end of the report with a nice point about everything that we've been saying here. This is stuff we've been doing, and everyone should be considering doing this no matter what. So that's just an idea that might help alleviate the initial reaction when people open it up and the first thing they see is conservation.
I kind of like that. I like saying our discussion is about augmentation. I mean, that's our permit here, and so, a remit. So, yes, we should always be striving for conservation, but this is supposed to be about augmentation. I like what you said. I also, one other thought about in the details here, and that is that preventing or reducing system losses is not, that may be very expensive. So the economic viability of these conservation strategies is quite variable, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
So it goes back to Jerry, like we could write a whole.
it gets back to the desalination issue, you know, at some point, reducing system losses will become doable.
That's right. But it's really been problematic, I think, for us. We get hung up on this conversation every time we get together.
And then the rural areas, they're in much better shape. Reducing system losses in urban areas. It always starts with a B.
We'll try to go faster on the
Got
Yeah, well, let's go to reclaimed water. We're going to remove.
Any other comments on conservation before we move on?
Well, I guess I'm not clear. I think Warren was kind of suggesting moving it out as a project, not keeping it in here as if it's a project in the way that desalination is a project? Or am I wrong?
Well, I think,
I was suggesting of not moving it out, but moving it back. So,
To somewhere else.
yeah, so
Oh, that- yeah.
the general practices to encourage where applicable, 1, 2, 3, and 4 could be at the end of
I like
the
that.
whole report.
Yep.
And that's easy to do.
Yeah, we can just,
Yeah, it's just moving the numbers
like that.
around.
Yeah.
So, in the narrative, then, strikes me to capture what Sarah and Warren were talking about is whether in the report or in these labels or identifiers for these water conservation, you might include that descriptor about best practices, or I think Jerry and I were talking about existing water management tools, because that's really what they are. Each community has to decide how to deploy those tools in a way that meets their own range of needs, desires, what their community looks like, all those types of things. I would ask you to think about that as well, as whether how to describe them at the end in a way that sort of honors that there are already tools in place now. You wouldn't go to the legislature and say, we need support for municipal conservation, and the answer would be, well, shouldn't they be doing that already?
sure.
If I may, I think one of the original, first of all, just a reminder that conservation, municipal conservation, was fed to us as one of the things that you wanted in the list as a project.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we're trying to come up with a menu of items, not dissimilar from what you just said. Menu of items by planning area, by time frame. So these are things, like when we were talking about water conservation, it's implementable in the first 0 to 10 years for each planning area across the board. So it's just, when this goes to the governor's office and the governor's committee, this is included in a list of items. I don't disagree with the idea of talking about it differently in the text, but we're talking about project fact sheet. And this is a description of what the project is, and how somebody who's considering, and in this case, improving their conservation program, might go about doing that. So I hear what you're saying, but this has been something that was, from the very beginning, something that we wanted to include as a project for this time frame. So maybe it's just more about how we talk about it in the text than it is about moving a fact sheet to the back of a list when it's clearly applicable for every planning area in the first 0 to 10 years.
So that's a good reminder, and I know we keep, trying to, ourselves as a committee, wrap our heads around what exactly we're trying to accomplish. But that's a good reminder about that the goal is to come up with for each planning area, what can be done within certain time frames. Here are things that can be done now and later and such. So conservation, obviously, is something that could be done right away.
Yeah, well, that's how we have been proceeding as a consultant team according to this. So I think it still makes sense to include it that way, but the way that we describe it can be different. If you disagree, that's totally fine. If you want to go back to what was previously said and move this fact sheet to the back of the list, it just is a little bit of a departure.
And I think maybe what is a little, we're seeing the fact sheets before we see the actual report. So maybe that's throwing us off a bit, because we're thinking, oh, these are the augmentation.
The report,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think these are just characterizing the individual projects so that you know what we're talking about as we kind of put together the rest of the report. This is like the meat of it. Richard, am I mischaracterizing anything?
No,
So my question is the numerical way that these are presented tied to the time in which they will, I guess that sounds like what Guy's saying. Because then moving it to the back would be a reverse, because these are the ones that are available in order from on that foot map. Is that tie made all the way through?
There is a general trend
So
on
these
the
ones-
order of these versus the timing of
Okay.
these shown on the map.
Okay. Well, and then, maybe, you have it, project number 1, but, it could be more tied to the time then. Project 1, that all these earlier, however you do this, is that these are the 0 to 10-year options. That's why they're first, not because we think they're the most important ones.
Yeah. We can group them by time frame, we can group them by however you want, but the map's created based on time.
Right now, they're
Right.
grouped numerically, 1 through 8. As long as they're on toward the middle or the tail end of the volume, then the early part of the report, you refer to them by number. Does that really make much difference where they are in the project listing?
Okay.
What is the consensus then? What are we going to do with
Well,
project 1?
So I think what Warren was saying was, right now they're 1, 2, 3, 4, which we're looking at them out of context, but so those are the first ones that you see. And that maybe because they're not augmentation options, Warren suggested moving them to the back. What I'm saying is, or I guess my question was, are these numbered numerically to mesh with how they show up in the maps? And if that's the case, then I think all we need to do is change this somehow so it indicates these are not the ones we think are the highest priority. That's why they're 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's because they are the shorter term.
Or doable.
They're the 0 to 10 year versus more important.
They're not showing up on the map now, right?
Well,
So
some of them are.
the icon is,
Have a note.
Ag.
Has a note.
yeah, just that one,
Yeah.
just the one ag,
Yeah.
Pinell County ag.
Decided last.
And that's consistent because
I meant conservation.
it's so
Yeah,
busy
yeah,
it's
yeah.
everywhere. So, it is on there. There's the water drop that says municipal water conservation applies to all types.
Yep, yep.
So, and then you did actually for reclaimed water use. Have that.
Yeah, there are quite a few reclaimed.
And the managed aquifers show up. And then that water.
Okay. We probably need to move on to other topics if we can get through.
So, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, are we going to note that these are sort of ubiquitous, this best practice thing? And I appreciate Guy's comment, conservation was fed to you, it is a project, I agree with that. I just want to make sure that we all that the reader understands that it is a best practice. Folks should be doing it as part of, or look at it as part of their normal toolbox, rather than a new thing. Because every municipality has this opportunity today.
Right. Yeah, we can write it that way.
Okay.
And see at the report outline, and we can put this in the body of the report, or we can put it in an appendix. And if it goes in an appendix, obviously there's discussion, but either way, in the report, we would try and position these things with the message that you want.
What's your concept of how the report is going to be presented? In other words, what's the outline for the report?
Okay, we have a handout of that.
I saw that.
Do you want to see that?
No, what I'm really concerned about is, are we going to prioritize in the report? In other words, are we going to put what we think are the best options, or what we consider to be the priority water augmentation projects first, or are we just going to let them play out?
I don't envision doing a strict prioritization, because I think every planning area needs to decide what they want to do and what they want to pay for, and I don't think we can do that as a part of this project. What we are going to do in calling some things out that we've been asked to do is to look at, you know, the top 1 or 2 or 3 projects that would benefit the most and take a long lead time and so on, and those are the ocean desalination with all the other projects that are required to bring those to fruition. So those, as I'm envisioning, will get some special attention in the report.
Okay.
But even there, I don't see us saying this is the one you really have to do, because
That's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at us making a decision, which ones offer the greatest immediate opportunity or best
feasible.
long-term opportunity, and doing some sort of a scale on them and say, okay, these are the ones we think that you should pay attention to first, because just like everybody else in the room, I'm going to read the first, and then that's all I'm going to read. Okay, so if you want it to be read, you want it to be considered, it's going to have to be near the front of the report.
okay.
You know, I know this must be really frustrating, because you guys have done so much work on this, and so, but optics and perception are going to be important, and so it's like when we're looking at this sheet where it says projects that can be completed within the 10 years, it seems that it would be more useful if we're to go along with what Wade's saying and try to get people to look at what projects can be done. Municipal water conservation or agricultural water conservation, those two should be down towards the bottom, as these are things that we should be doing no matter what. And yes, it's something that can be done right away, but we're wanting to get people to start thinking of augmentation potentials through reclaimed water use. And so that's why I'm thinking maybe this, if you move it down with the agriculture, you're kind of changing how this appears to someone that just is looking at it and goes, wait a minute, why is conservation and augmentation? I mean, it's important. It does provide demand management. It can provide a water supply, but anyway, that's just one
If we get
thought.
hung up on it, other people will get hung up on it.
Yeah.
Well, and the sheet that you referred to, there's nothing meaningful that we did to try and establish that order.
No, I know.
So I have no problem with moving it around however you
Yeah.
want.
Yeah. I mean, I know you were basing this on probably the last conversation we had, and where we were focusing on, hey, conservation can something be done right away. And it can be, but I think now that we're seeing everything put together with this, I think that's what's having us kind of think that through again.
Oh, it seems like we're generally in agreement here that there are clusters of truly water augmentation options and existing tools, management tools that should be utilized more. We encourage people to continue to. So, I mean, that's easy. We all seem to agree on that. We might have a couple of suggestions how that could be dealt with. They could be referred to that in the text. So, I'm not talking much today because I've talked for the last 2 years and had these discussions over and over again. But it does seem like we're all on the same page about this one. So maybe we could go to number 2.
All the way to number 2.
All the way to number 2.
It's been a long journey.
We're obviously going to need 30 hours to review these 30 projects, whatever we have.
Detail.
I did have a question.
Find it, but, that's probably figured they get some narrative.
Meeting that I missed.
Yeah, we had to do very.
Moral.
Yeah, that's why they sent it out
To me, they different to you project anytime you want.
What's the decision about?
Okay.
Might have put these now.
These are where there maybe is actual stuff.
Okay, all right.
When we're on number 2.
When we're on number 2.
Yeah. Are we on
I've been
project
waiting.
2 now?
We're on project 2.
Yay, okay.
Okay, so my question just was, we had talked about this 2 times ago, I guess, maybe, when I was here last. And I know there's been a big discussion. We don't want to make the map too busy, and Jerry, you're probably going to throw something at me about asking this again, but what was the decision about why to put the reclaimed water one all over the place? And I'm just curious, not necessarily asking one or the other, as opposed to doing it the way you did the drop. I'm just wondering.
Because the reclaimed water is not in every planning area, and we were putting the drop in every planning area. If you look like Western Plateau doesn't
Yep, yep.
have,
Bill Williams.
How much more potential is there in the basin and range AMAs for reclaimed water use? Should it be in there?
Yeah.
Additional.
Is there?
Yeah. I mean, as you go further out from the urban center, there is still opportunities, and there's still, so I would leave it in there.
Okay, that answers my question. I remember we were talking about that at one point.
Okay. Now, the reclaimed water projects, in some ways, that's almost a catch-all for a number of things, whether it is direct reuse, aquifer storage and recovery, direct potable reuse, going from a lagoon system to a mechanical treatment facility so you have better quality water to do more with your reclaimed water.
Give us a page reference.
Page reference, this is page 5 of 56.
Page 5, Wade.
Now, one thing that I wanted to throw out here, you'll see on the levelized cost per acre foot, and this one may just illustrate an issue that is all the way through these fact sheets. I'm showing a variation in cost by some groupings here, $300 or $600 or $1,900 per acre foot. Those costs can vary much more than what is shown here. And so on the one hand, we want to be truthful and realistic on costs that we present. On the other hand, we also want to represent ranges where ranges are occurring. And back to this question of how specific do we want to be, how general do you want to be? Do you have any particular opinions or guidance on how you want to see cost numbers?
I like a range,
Yeah, I was,
like a reasonable range.
Okay.
So be it.
And one of the things, and let's just explore that a little bit more, just as some examples. To take direct potable reuse, if you have a system with a low TDS, such as Flagstaff, you might be able to do that for $1,300 to $1,500. If you go somewhere where you've got to manage brine, the cost is twice that.
Right.
So think of that way of thinking of the cost. Now I'll throw something else on top of that. The American Association of Costing Engineers has different levels of costs with the accuracy that can be provided with them, Class 1 through Class 5. These are Class 5, which are the least accurate range. And according to them, the cost range can be from minus 50% less than the cost presented to 100% more, which is a huge range. I tried putting that on the graph that I'll show you later. It looks silly, quite frankly. It wasn't very helpful to communicate a message. And so there's several things I can do. I can say, well, based on our experience, maybe we'll go minus 20% and plus 30% on some of the cost ranges, so we don't have a really ridiculous range.
So, cost, as Richard is saying, is very site-specific.
Yeah.
And which is why, under the original proposed scope of work, we didn't even look at costs for all of the planning areas, right? We waited until we were farther down and we were looking at a small number of very site-specific projects. So, I don't remember I don't know what the answer to your question is, but I did just want everybody to remember that we recognize that, and now we're backing off trying to find costs for totally random things across the state. So, I don't know how reasonable it is to do that without a ton of footnotes. I guess my question would be, do you guys think that cost would be something that would drive a community to consider doing reclaimed water use? So is that something that we would necessarily, necessarily have to have in here. I guess for some of these that we're looking at that are available in every portion of the state, we're gonna fall into that probably with every cost estimate, because we're trying to look at it across the moon. So do we just maybe not provide a cost
Well, I think,
for these first four?
I think you need to put a range at least.
$2.
Get back to the same discussion we had on GPD.
Yeah. Mhm.
This is only one alternative. Some planning areas are gonna have more than one, so having a range, I think is,
Well, and I think it's similar to, and not that I want to move backwards, but the levelized cost per acre foot on the municipal water conservation is $25 to $100 an acre foot, only for installing plumbing fixtures or removing turf.
Right.
I mean, if we looked at the full range of
Like-
water conservation and we start looking, like Bruce said, at infrastructure improvements, the range becomes meaningless
Right.
again.
So maybe,
I'm sorry, but there's, Los Angeles and Las Vegas have a wildly different cost for removing turf on dollar per acre foot than $100 an acre foot. It's significantly higher than that.
it's subjective though.
Yes. Chuck, but Chuck, what's your recommendation because of that?
I would note what they paid. That information's out there, and it's eye-popping, the unit cost for turf removal, which is why it's a last gasp effort for desperate municipalities. And saying it's $100 an acre foot would lead people to pressure urban areas to do something that is, I mean, your folks would probably jump at $100 an acre foot turf removal. That's not what the cost is.
well, the problem
It's $2 a square foot.
is you have to incentivize someone to get rid of it.
Right.
And
And then you have to look at what has already been accomplished in the city of Phoenix, which used to have about 80% turf. It's now 15% among residential.
majority turf.
So is that how much bang are you going to get for that compared to what California and Las
And then,
Vegas?
you know,
That's why they're paying $2 a square foot.
Yeah.
it brings
Which
back
is
this other point, which is, you know, in my job, I get asked all the time, why aren't the cities around here doing more to reduce water use? And I hope that we can convey, when we talk about conservation, somewhere in the text or somewhere, that this slow adoption of efficiency, slow cultural change, as Catherine Soren talks about it, is more manageable than if we radically, you know, did what had to be done in LA in 2015 because they were in a terrible drought and they were rationing water. But I think we need to convey that too, that I'm all for taking the dollar signs out. I think the descriptions here and this discussion, that's the information that we should be conveying. And the economic viability statement, if we are on Project 2, that says it's similar to or less than the cost of purchasing water supplies, that's a very helpful piece of information. Much more helpful, in fact, than dollars per acre foot. So I'm happy with taking it out of these four, as you suggested, but I think also conveying that this kind of conservation has a particular role. I mean, reclaimed is different, but conservation, there's a role there about the gradual adoption at a rate that's very manageable for water providers. So I hope we can convey that too.
Okay.
So my recommendation was either remove it, or I do like what Chuck said, if you're going to put it, be very specific about the location, you know, and then people can consider how similar to this location are we that the cost would be the same. But I think trying to come up with a range
Too hard.
is too hard.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't mean anything.
Could this be in footnotes, appendix, reference to, C, also, rather than expanding the fact sheet?
Well, one of the things that we could do, and I think what is useful on the cost, probably more than an individual cost itself, is what is the cost of this versus the cost of
Yes,
that.
yes.
And so you do have a graph that sort of shows that, and I think the message overall of that kind of a graph is to say, well, if you're really willing to spend this much, maybe these are the things that you do, and if you really want to go to ocean desalination, look what kind of preparation you've got to do. That's a different ballgame, and maybe it excludes ag even because of the high cost and so on. And so we could take it out of here and then just put a cost section in the report where we provide some comparatives and maybe some summary information just so that people know what they're looking at.
I like your economic viability statement, though. Even, I might tweak it in each of these somewhat, but I think that that's helpful.
Okay.
So I wouldn't want to lose that part.
Okay.
So on project 2, when I look at the table, this table,
Yep.
it would be helpful to have, at least for my glancing page, you had 2A, 2B, 2C, sort of instead of being reclaimed as all three of those things, and it would make 2 fact sheets, but have them specific to the project 2A, 2B, and 2C.
I think we decided the last meeting to lump them together.
Really?
Yeah.
That's what we have.
Well,
A couple.
I'm generally a lumper, but this time I'm advocating splitting.
Wait for that table though? This is a-
Well, so that it tracks across from the table to the fact sheets. Because the issues around the actual deployment are different, substantially different. Direct potable reuse, you have a whole suite of new infrastructure to put the reclaimed water back in potable systems, and the ability to deploy the resource is different based on different communities, different infrastructure, different geology if you're going to do managed aquifer. So I apologize if that's a retreat from where you were previously.
As a project team, we have lumped and unlumped several different ways on several of these different projects. So
Okay.
I don't care which, I'll do whichever way the committee wants to go.
Sure, I apologize then for being late to that party. It's not my hill to die for.
Does Leroy say, never apologize for the sign of
Well, you know that's not true.
Yes.
But, I'm sorry for
Gibbs,
taking that time.
Gibbs.
So, by the way, since we just talked about taking cost out, would we be taking it out of this fabulous chart too? Is that
Well,
of the first 4?
it would actually be easier for us to have one section in the report that talks about costs. We could include the tables, we could include graphs, and we could include assumptions.
That's good.
And it's easier for us because then I don't have to make sure that this is in line with that.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So if that's what you want to do, then we'll do that.
Sounds good.
Makes sense.
So basically for every fact sheet, not just these 4, for every fact sheet, remove levelized cost per acre foot?
Yeah, just
Is
handle
that
it.
what you're saying?
I'm good with it.
Yeah.
As long as there's some cost discussion somewhere in the report.
Yeah.
And since we're just kind of working over the generalities of this thing, who's the target audience here? It seems to me like we've got at least 2 groups that we're targeting, and that doesn't include the public. We have the engineers and the planners, the technical people who are going to read this and want to know where they can get the information that backs it up and the things they can look at. And then, for want of a better term, there's the political ones, the elected ones, the board members, the council members, and they're not going to want to read all that stuff. We've got to kind of take that into account when we write this report, is that we need to service both groups.
Did you sign in?
Well, and then the other audience was supposed to be the working in the planning areas, right? Of working with, I imagine that public as well as the planning folks and the elected folks in
Local
each of,
elected,
all
yeah.
the local people. Yeah, so it's kind of,
Even though the goal of this project is to identify an augmentation opportunity in each planning area, a lot of it is to sort of disqualify augmentation opportunities in areas. And we should keep in mind that that's an effect of this report.
I saw him over there. Oh, I saw those eyes.
Yeah. At least in the next 60 years.
Wade, your comment, would it be best in the report if we had an executive summary that was addressed directly to those that have the political interest?
I know lots of people that would read only the executive summary.
Most people.
Yeah, and look at the two tables. This
Yep.
table.
And it needs to be something under 20 pages.
Yeah, that's not a, yeah.
But literally, that's what they'll do, especially those that got elected. They'll take a look at it, but it's people like Chuck and Bruce that are gonna really delve into it, and they need the information.
Okay. All right, are there other comments on reclaimed water use before we move on to the next one?
good.
In general, is this level of detail for the fact sheet?
I got a bunch of comments.
Does it leave you wanting something or thinking it was too much?
I'm sorry, we weren't listening. We weren't being disrespectful, we were just listening to Bruce.
Sorry.
My question was, in general, is this the level of detail that you think is appropriate for the fact sheet?
Yes, and of course, we'll be talking about some of those details as we go through each fact sheet. But yes, the level of detail, I think, works very well.
Okay.
So does Chuck.
Correct. Thank you.
All right, should we move on to project 3, managed aquifer recharge?
Why would you, just do depending on. Okay.
Help me understand what is urban enhanced runoff.
Urban enhanced runoff is runoff that is in urban areas that is increased because of the paved areas and so on. We're trying to make a differentiation between that kind of runoff and runoff that occurs more naturally that entities such as SRP might think that, you know, they depend on the runoff for their stream flows, and so they don't want it allocated for something else, and so.
And is that recognized in the statute? I just don't know.
No, it's not recognized, but it's not appropriable either. So if you capture it in your Home Depot parking lot, it's yours to do with essentially what you want.
So actually, Nature Conservancy is working with Bureau of Reclamation to do a low impact development study in the Phoenix AMA. And I finally remember what LID meant. But it's decreasing or increasing pervious surfaces.
I understand the concept. Is it been recognized by the department
No.
or the courts
No.
or Salt River Project?
We spent a lot of time working with the Salt River Project.
The reason we are participating in that and is to make sure that is one, it is a very fine line in some areas, particularly not, I don't think so much in the urban environment, but in the rural environment, and the use of erosion control structures.
Well, those are in channel though.
I think it's important in here, remove any terminology that says surface water.
Yeah,
It's urban enhanced
that's
runoff.
exactly right. We're not talking about.
The moment you put
channel.
surface water in here, someone's appropriated that.
Yeah.
Surface water.
Yep.
And then we can have the discussion about what urban enhanced
Right.
runoff means. Yeah, we have been working with Nature
Yep.
Conservancy
Yep.
on some of these
We-
projects, so. But I'd just get rid of that term surface water.
Okay.
So, how are you, there it is, this concept has been around for a while, and it sort of stubs its toe on water quality.
Yep.
Issues and contaminants. So, where's that in the list here?
It is public acceptance challenges, number 1.
Don't you think it's more than public acceptance? Then, isn't it subject to potential permitting?
It is. I mean, I don't see it in here, and I didn't look. It said list of anticipated permits. You've got them 404, NEPA, but there's also APP and potentially Clean Water Act issues, so, I mean, other than the 404. So, I don't know, because I haven't gone through all these in a while, to what extent you're going through the permitting questions for each of them. But there are potential, depending on the type. I mean, if you're recharging effluent, whether you're recharging urban enhanced runoff, whether you're capturing what we call sheet flow, not in a channelized, not in a channel. There are certain...
Sheet flow goes somewhere.
She goes somewhere. I know, but we're capturing it before it goes that where. Yeah, I mean, I don't know to what extent, how deep you want to get into the permitting. Juliet, you can tell us all about the permitting that we've been doing, right? I mean, so I don't know. That's your call. There is permitting that is associated with it. From my perspective, it might not be bad to identify that, to let everybody know that that's in fact where, if you do this, you got to comply with those components to make sure.
And perhaps we need to come up with a rule or regulatory change that defines what urban enhanced runoff is. And maybe that's something that could be part of the discussion. You come up with a legal definition of what that is, so that you avoid...
That might not be bad down the road, getting any of those through. And yeah, I mean, if you could...
It would just be unfortunate in the extreme if folks got excited about the Home Depot parking lot as a resource, only to discover that antifreeze is not really welcome.
Yeah. No, I find, and you do need to, if you're going to, let's presume, recharge it into the ground.
You have to be responsible to recharge in the ground.
There's a whole system of permits and
because it's recharging anyway, it's going somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think there's even a question about the definition of urban. I think we want to maybe look at that definition of urban enhanced runoff.
We have actually a number of good definitions that we've used before. I'd be happy to.
I don't think not subject to prior appropriation is helpful there.
If you want to...
And we hope it's not subject to prior appropriation. I would leave that out, and maybe there are better...
Yeah, we can work on this. That's easy. Yeah, that's no problem.
The focus here, we're talking about aquifer recharge in general, saying that you can do it through managed recharge projects, through aquifer recharge using reclaimed, as well as urban enhanced runoff, correct? So this might be where it might be helpful to have the two that are more familiar listed first, and then move urban enhanced runoff to the third spot, so that it's clear that we're talking about all three, and we don't get people hung up on a new title, and that they haven't seen, that they're not as familiar with as the other ones.
Okay.
This is another question I'm sure you guys dealt with last time when I went here. Is that, other than it looks like you found another one up here, is that something that you've determined, and I don't know, I don't necessarily have an opinion on this, would be applicable anywhere else other than these two locations? I know there are a number of entities in the Verde considering it. Now, it wouldn't necessarily be as obviously groundwater recharge as it would be maybe enhancing river flows, but it would be urban enhanced. It could be effluent based.
Are you doing it in the Verde already?
Well, we're looking to. We have this Clean Water Act issue we've got to fix first. This Maui decision that's up before the U.S. Supreme Court. But once that's fixed. And I think I asked this question before, and maybe, Sarah, you answered it. I can't remember. But certainly I know that it's being looked at doing, they're looking at doing it in the Verde. I have no idea where else in the state it might be. But anywhere where, in terms of there's effluent or urban enhanced runoff, I mean, these are potentially possible locations, but I don't know where else those would be. The one that I am sure of is in the Verde. And I think I've raised this before, and you had a good reason why we didn't put the icon on the map, but I can't remember what it was. But I would suggest putting it in the Verde as well.
Okay, we'll add Verde to it.
I can't remember what's in the San Pedro too.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, Richard? So this is combining, the major aquifer recharge is the urban enhanced and then regular recharge in the state. The way we've done it under the recharge program, is that correct?
It's reasonable.
This is one that has been combined from
Right.
at least an earlier internal iteration.
Right. So,
And it was intended to capture things such as what's going on in the upper San Pedro. Also, we're looking at some of the things that maybe were happening in around Kingman.
right. But if it does include other recharge, then I would agree that there are probably more planning areas that it's actually occurring now. Definitely the Roosevelt planning area, because Payton's going to start their underground recharge of their Dragon water, soon, or rather than later. So I just wanted to say if it's not just the urban enhanced runoff, if it is the recharge, then I think it should be reflected on the map, every area where the state currently has recharge projects. So definitely in the Verde, because Cottonwood is in the process.
Well, and
Sedona.
certainly in the next 10 years, I mean, that is definitely,
And they're doing direct injection. Some, aren't they doing managed recharge in one of their small creeks, I think?
yeah.
Cottonwood?
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, they're trying
They are.
to,
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing like a little managed
I don't think
recharge.
it's permitted.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't tell DEQ.
Project
I'm not aware of a permit.
is maybe not articulated real well, but at least in my own head, I'm viewing this one as more of a managing the aquifer as opposed to your typical municipality that does aquifer storage and recovery for reclaimed water, or even to manage a CEP water supply, for example. I don't know if that distinction.
Yeah. And then I would, even if you consider it that way, I think the Verde would be a place you'd want to put that. Now, it's a little different than what you have in some of these other places that don't have surface water. I mean, most of the work that we're doing on is designed to supply, to supplement stream flows. Now, those stream flows are generally appropriated by somebody, so they are call it an augmentation program. But it's, so I would certainly say in the Verde and the San Pedro, anywhere. I mean, but yeah, in terms of something different than just, recharge.
Right.
Those two places at the very least. Not think about whether we think there's other locations we want.
On your definition,
Yeah, because it has.
the third paragraph there, says surface water. That's not the case. That has to be recovered locally. So maybe just say storage credit, or?
Well, it depends on what you consider surface water. So Colorado River water isn't surface water. So do you see what she's saying in that one? So you can get a credit for effluent or treatment water or Colorado River water.
But not surface water. That doesn't accrue long-term storage.
Well, CAP
Except for
water,
dams.
right? Not Colorado River water.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Well, is every drop that comes through CAP water, CAP water? I mean, that comes through the CAP, even like the Octane water, that's a different priority?
It's project water delivered as priority 3 water.
Okay, so it still is considered CAP.
Yeah.
But there's a statute that allows you to earn a credit for surface water, but is it dams constructed? No one.
It's the
NCS water.
NCS water.
Yeah.
So, do you need a qualifier?
Well, and I guess
Or some
if you're
surface water?
saying-
Can you say some surface water?
when I ask my question, so here you have aquifer recharge using reclaimed water, but you're saying this map doesn't reflect that, because the reclaimed water is reflected on the reclaimed water? Was I correct in when you said?
Well, yeah, what's a little bit awkward, maybe not clear in the definition, is that, for example, in the Upper San Pedro, they can use reclaimed water that's used for focus on stream augmentation, which is really a different purpose than using recharge
urban enhancement.
within a municipality for aquifer storage.
I think that's what he's trying to get at. Yeah.
So you're thinking that this managed aquifer recharge is something that's only to augment water supplies and not, the credits not be recovered? I guess I'm not.
I'll say what you said, Bruce, because that's how I would.
The way I interpreted this is this was really focused on the urban enhanced runoff and reclaimed water, and really wasn't so focused on the AMAs and CAP recharge and those large recharge projects.
It's not even.
That's how I
It's not,
interpreted
Basin and
this.
Range is not one of the benefiting planning areas.
Yeah.
So, and if that's the case,
We can get rid of that.
in the definition, we're going to want to make sure that,
Yeah, the third paragraph in the definition is confusing relative to what I said.
and, yeah.
Consequence of aggregating and separating and
Yeah, so
terms need to be changed. Okay.
So I would say that in the Roosevelt planning area, Payson's recharge of water is
Yep.
definitely for it to be recovered at a
Yep.
later point in time, so I don't know if it meets whatever criteria you're doing for this. With regard to the project that Cottonwood is trying to permit, with their injection wells is, they use their CAP trust fund monies, and this is supposed to be to augment their water supply. They're going to be injecting their recovered effluent into the aquifers where their primary water bearing wells are to plump up the aquifer. So I don't know how that falls into.
Doesn't Flagstaff do direct injection too, with their reclaimed water? Some of it goes to the,
That's one of the options that they're considering.
oh,
I
think having been in place today.
yeah, okay.
They just discharge it in Rio de Flag.
Rio de Flag and Ski.
Yeah, and makes them.
And then Sedona has a USF, but I think it's primarily to
Sprinkle the desert.
go to the effluent.
Yeah, they evaporate it.
Any other comments on Project 3? I go to Project 4, which is water conservation for agriculture.
I have just a similar question on that, on the map. You have, there's actually two key. The lower one says it applies to planting areas where conserved water can be transferred to a beneficial use. I presume that is the same as the water draw. Does that mean it can be done anywhere? How is it?
We had quite a discussion on agricultural conservation at an earlier meeting. And the challenge we had at that time was that just because a farm or an irrigation district conserves water doesn't mean it becomes available. And so we reduced the areas we were considering to be only those areas where if the water was conserved for agriculture, that it could actually be transferred or moved or used in some other place. And that's why it looks rather small.
So especially where it's used, where groundwater is used, is where that's where there's more of a benefit from agricultural water conservation.
Okay, and the other areas like the Verde, because we're talking about surface water that hasn't been adjudicated yet. Is that your concern? That is a concern. But
Yeah, it's a question.
So, a lot of our work is, whether it's head gates or on-farm infrastructure, there are water savings there that are currently going in the river, and because you have a super senior downstream appropriator, they should stay in the river. I don't know if that's something you would consider.
I think putting it in the Verde makes sense. And I don't know about, if there are opportunities in Cochise County where it might also make sense.
Yeah.
Well, also La Paz.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're the ones who've been in the news.
They're the most upset about it, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't recall the exact, I mean, I remember the last time I was here 2 times ago, we did have a long discussion on this.
I think we just were, and we were taking issue with the idea that if we got surface water ag to reduce their consumption through efficiency, that would mean augmentation for someone else.
Yep.
Depends on who's paying for it as well.
Yeah. But we were especially looking at, I think for example, Yuma surface water ag efficiency doesn't necessarily lead to more water for Phoenix.
Right.
Phoenix area. So that was really what the discussion was largely about.
So if we're focusing on groundwater, wouldn't Cochise and
Well, that's what I'm wondering too.
The Northwest Basin stem?
Yeah. It seems like there are opportunities. In a way, this goes back to the other discussion, which has now, I think, moved along, that these are sort of best practices that could, we hadn't made that distinction yet when we had this conversation before. And the part of my issue is all you're doing is slowing down the mining of the non-replenishing supply in some areas, and that isn't, we don't want to identify that as an augmentation strategy necessarily. We've kind of moved to a place where if we're talking about these as kind of best practices that apply everywhere, I'm more comfortable with identifying it more places.
Yeah, and I'm kind of, yes. Although I wonder, and I don't mean to go back to Project 3, sorry. I wonder if something like capturing urban enhanced runoff and recharging it wouldn't be augmentation as opposed to best practice. And I don't necessarily want to get into philosophical. I don't want to, you know what?
Well, and there's a whole hydrological question about that too. I mean, I get it when you're trying to keep a cone of depression from eating a river, but there's going to be recharge with the water that goes in the ground.
Either way.
Either way, yeah. So it may be going to a river, it may be just
but I
going.
mean, again, for the Home Depot parking lot, the whole idea was it now doesn't just sit there and evaporate.
But it
actually
doesn't.
clogged.
It doesn't. People there are
It depends on where it
culverts
goes.
and
how it goes.
Yeah.
In some places that are better managed, it doesn't. In some places it is not. So, all right, you know what? I'm fine. I don't want to go back to...
Go see my parking lot. The 3rd floor is flooded.
Yeah, there you go.
So, I note that the first identified option includes irrigating less land.
That was artfully stated.
That I noted it?
No, it was irrigating less land, artfully stated as saying, cut agriculture.
Well, while that's some elegant drafting, I think people will quickly come to a conclusion, particularly in the agricultural sector, Wade, that
that's not an
Chris
option.
and Bill, that that's not conservation. Conservation is, at least from my view, is an investment in a water efficiency approach rather than fallowing land.
And I agree with you, Chuck, but to me, part of this talks about, if we're talking about augmentation as a whole, is moving water from one sector to another, is that augmentation?
It inevitably...
I've thought about it differently. I mean, I've thought about augmentation as, making the pie bigger, not taking from one pie to the other. I was the younger brother, so, I always got the smallest piece. I wanted a bigger pie.
I can relate.
Exchanges and transfers are part of it.
No, I get the scope question. It's just, how is the audience going to react when you're talking about fallowing, but you're unwilling to call it fallowing? You're trying to call it conservation. And if that's a strategy, I think you should say conservation and fallowing if that's the idea. If it's not, then delete, irrigate less land.
Or just put the word in, put the F word in, bomb them. Fallowing.
I'm a big rip the Band-Aid off kind of guy.
Well, down in possible project components, it says crop rotation and fallow.
It touches some, this is another one of these where we started out as more than one project and they get aggregated together.
Right.
I have one general discomfort with the handling of agriculture overall in this, and that is the majority of the water in the state goes to agriculture, but all we have is one little project. It's kind of a catch-all for multiple things for ag, and is that the message we want to have in
Most of your work with urban water, is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think that's true.
But I don't think that, I think it's fine, because we are, as a state, probably not looking at expanding agriculture, except in very limited circumstances for tribal water rights. And we don't, what's that?
I said, but unfortunately, we are.
Well, and we are expanding in I think, hobby farms, perhaps. Well, I guess you're right, we are. Industrial farming, moving it all over the state, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. But
Thank you, California.
yeah. I don't think the fact that agriculture uses 2/3 of the water is a reason to call out agriculture more.
Okay.
We have to call out augmentation opportunities where they exist, rather than sort of getting hung up on them.
So my one comment on this is exactly similar to my comment on the conservation, the municipal conservation, because I think it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
It could be, we're gonna have that tension of saying enough, but not writing a master's thesis on it. And for this one, we only got 2 pages versus the 4 pages for the municipal conservation. In the definition, I think calling out some of those broader things as we discussed in the municipal conservation, instead of saying lining canals, we could say system improvements, because there's tons of on-farm, off-farm system improvements that are in addition. And you can have lining canals that still leak. I mean, we had that discussion down in Yuma. So I think those large categories could be a little bit better defined.
And what I meant before was, I don't think as a state we're looking at augmenting the water supply for ag. That isn't the concern in the statewide water discussion. We need to bring in more water for agriculture. We're moving beyond, even though there is more ag moving in and using water in places with unregulated groundwater supplies, it isn't the direction we're looking to go as a state.
Okay.
So, one of the other comments I know is that in the sheet, there's no discussion of levelized costs, but there is in the table. And if you're including fallowing, those costs are different than what's in this table.
Sure.
And I don't think the ag districts who invested in mining canals and drip systems and all that kind of stuff, they may not recognize the cost framework you've got here.
Sure.
At least from the capital side. So you probably need to make sure that folks understand that you're talking on the water savings side, but when you're investing in drip systems and sprinklers, the cost per acre is going to be probably different than what's shown here.
Yep, I agree.
So, Richard, just
Difference too.
are we removing then the idea of following from this one, speaking of your
I think that, we can clarify on this one that it would include land fallowing, but I don't think that means you take it off of transfer one. Because at least I'm seeing that as kind of a separate
And then
one.
is that land fallowing associated with providing water within that same service area, or that same planning area? Is it for the benefit of other ag users within that? Or is it just generally for anybody?
I think what we have now is just generally, we haven't defined it to be specific to a planning area. Correct.
Water districts are the only farmers.
Are there some others you think should be there?
Used it.
The farmers also. Would you see any kind of state involvement?
Water users would pick up a lot of categories.
Yeah, thinking ditch companies.
Okay, any others before we move on?
So, I'm sorry, how did you resolve the following question?
We were gonna list it here, but that does not preclude it from being listed on another one.
Okay, so we're gonna we use the F word, Wade?
I think we have to.
Okay.
And some people do, anyway.
Yep.
Could you just flip that list?
Yeah.
Sure.
Could you just flip the list?
We put that one last?
No, number 4 be number 1,
Okay,
number 3 be number 2, number 2 be number 3, and number 1 be number 4.
sure.
Oh, flip the list.
Well, hey, he's an engineer, I have
Okay, let's jump into the next section with regulatory.
And are you gonna include costs here in the fact sheets and the table?
No, I think we're
Take them out.
gonna take all the costs out and put them in one place.
All right,
Which will allow us to expand and do a better job.
thank you.
Okay, project 5 is deep well injection permitting. This one has a specific purpose, which is, this is one of several methods of dealing with the brine from reverse osmosis treatment. And when we do brackish desalination, the hope is that we can have it at a lower cost. This is one potential way of doing that. We need to, and the idea here is to work on the permitting process to make it something that should be done and viable.
So
You want to say something more about that, Julia?
Yeah, internally, we discussed this, and we turned this into a recommendation to clarify the permitting process. With DWR and DEQ, and the primacy issue with EPA. Our interpretation is the regulations allow this, but that the permitting process going down the road with the regulatory agencies, there's need for clarification and perhaps there will be others in the room that have more experiences with it. That's where those recommendations came from on the second page. I think when it came out of the last meeting, it looked like write a new regulation.
The desal work group, we did have some conversation with DEQ about this issue. They were recommending a pilot project and a study, but the way you got this described works. As a partner with ADEQ. So what are you doing with the brine for direct potable reuse?
This could be another potential use for it. If you have areas such as Flagstaff with low TDS, then that can be done using a process that doesn't create a brine stream. But brine stream is a huge challenge that we're facing.
Is that embedded in the direct potable reuse cost? Is disposing of the waste stream?
On the high end of the range, it includes it. It does not include it on the low end of the range.
That must be some awesome effluent if you don't have to run it through a separation process to put it back in the system.
Well, that's where TDS levels around 300, which is
For effluent? For effluent?
in Flagstaff. Not anywhere else in the state.
So many thoughts come to my head about Flagstaff and things that don't smell.
I don't know of any other place where that would do that.
Everywhere else would be probably free.
Yeah, okay.
It's like clean air.
Clean living up in Flagstaff.
Air Nexus. Oh,
So are there any edits you want us to make on this one?
So I'm hearkening back to the original list of augmentation options that the committee defined. And these, other than maximize, I think maximize, I can't even remember if maximize safety canal throughout was. So in my mind, these are kind of a departure because they weren't things that were on the original list, and I know we discussed them a lot at the last meeting. So I'm wondering, and the majority of these are only beneficial, well, with the exception of the deep well injection permitting process for the brine disposal. So to me, that's part of the brackish groundwater desal.
Right.
So I guess structurally, I see 6, 7, 8, 9 really only benefiting the Basin Range AMA planning area. So should they be separated in some way and discussed differently? They don't seem at the same level, and so anyway, that was just my...
I view them as issues to help support some of the augmentation alternatives. In other words, we got to address this in order to move forward with brackish groundwater. This is an issue that has to be addressed. It's not a project per se.
Right.
And we could, this is another one where when we originally started with brackish desalination, this is a part of it. The challenge is that this is only one of multiple ways of dealing with the brine.
Right.
And so we didn't want to leave the impression that you had to do this and there weren't other ways of also dealing with it. The groundwater mining is...
Yeah, but they're kind of not projects.
They're not projects. They're barriers or...
They're regulatory fixes or...
Yeah.
A is a predecessor to other things.
You guys came up with this last time?
No.
I don't remember this one.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it a predecessor to?
I don't think 6 should be in there.
The
I think any of them should be.
ocean desalination projects in particular are ones where, whether it's through an exchange or whether it is direct delivering the water, we need infrastructure and a mechanism to move the water into the state.
I mean, why on the CAP side will people need recharge infrastructure to take Colorado River water that is made available through an exchange in California and Mexico? Because the release point is Lake
I
Erie.
never understood this one.
people can schedule it as normal water supply.
But the volume of water that we're talking about exceeds the capacity of what the CAP can.
Well, so that's different than, so that's about wheeling capacity in the CAP, which is, the system use agreement creates a space for all that to happen. Anyway.
Well,
So it's not, I would not link that to that, meaning the binational desal or exchange types of things. I mean, because you're talking about exceeding a supply, CAP deliveries of 1.8 plus million acre feet. Right, and if we're looking, I mean, right now with the drought contingency plan and other things that are on the horizon, the expectation is that CAP will struggle to get 1.6 off the river just from a reliability standpoint. So is this contemplating delivering 2 million acre feet through the CAP?
As an initial guess for desalination, I had 600,000 acre feet.
I like that, not gonna lie.
And so, you know, and I was at a meeting just last week, I don't blank on his name. Anyway, he gave a presentation at DWRI meeting talking about that, and there's the total volume that can be delivered, and then there's also scheduling, and he said, like, even last summer, CAP had to defer the delivery of some water orders during the peak of the summer because of scheduling challenges.
Yes, in the Central Arizona Agricultural District, to meet a voluntary peak, rather than having strict adherence to the contract. I wouldn't expect that going forward, particularly since those districts are going to be out of CAP water in 2030 under the excess pool program. I shouldn't say out of, that the excess pool program will be revisited in 2030. We don't need to spin on this. I'm taking a lot of time on this issue. We can talk offline about it.
I'm wondering if...
And your conversation will not be recorded.
I'm wondering if this is a little bit similar to some of what we had issue with when we were talking about municipal water conservation. I'm wondering if this is, some of these points are more that go into the text rather than being portrayed as an actual project or augmentation.
Right.
I think that
most of these are parts of things that would have to be accomplished to do what we think of as augmentation projects. Maybe the Buckeye waterlogged area, because that's about doing desal for 3 cities, right? Maybe the Roosevelt one, I don't quite have my head wrapped around
that. That could be a separate item, just a change in operation that helps augment the groundwater conditions in the valley. That's about what it does.
But the other ones, like the deep well injection permitting, is potentially a regulatory barrier to doing a groundwater desal plant. And so why don't we just put that in with as a barrier to groundwater desal when we identify the potential groundwater desal opportunities? Why call it out separately? And the 6 is, I think we should just eliminate entirely, because it's extremely, even though it may be certainly, you know, by many lights, important for lots of communities, it's fraught, it's very controversial.
Is there a particular, I agree, is there a particular other augmentation? I didn't know how 6 came from, where that came from.
I think we've often talked about how as long as groundwater is unregulated, it makes it hard to imagine the implementation of an augmentation project. Just as with the CAP, a precondition to the CAP by the federal government, not just Bruce Babbitt, it was in the 1968 legislation, was get your groundwater mining problem settled, because CAP didn't want to bring in water and not have or the feds didn't want to pay for that project and not have a customer base for that project, and that's a serious issue for areas where groundwater is unregulated. I think we need to highlight that issue somewhere, but it isn't a project.
Same thing you did with the adjudication.
Yeah, we need to mention it with adjudication.
That's exactly where it would
Same
go.
issue,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, we can put it in with the adjudications and the Indian water rights as one of the other issues.
As much as I would love to see Rural Groundwater Management Act.
Yeah, it's just, really.
This'll kill this.
So what's the
You carry on that charge.
So,
So I don't think I'll give you my 2 cents. I don't think 5 is a project. I think that should be mentioned or handled when we talk about groundwater desal. So I think that's what that's about. Groundwater mining regulation, I think, is something, we have written a paragraph about how the adjudication gets in the way, potentially is an impediment to a project. We should say lack of groundwater regulation is an impediment to one of these projects. And then Buckeye waterlogged, it sounds to me like that is another legal impediment to groundwater desal. I don't really, I leave it up to Bruce and Chuck on CAP canal throughput, though to me that's more of an impediment to ocean desal or some other kind of transfer. And then
Thanks for your help, Bruce.
flood control space, I still haven't quite figured out what that's about.
Flood control space is just, it's really an issue associated with limits that we have through the Corps of Engineers on operations of the system. We have a lot of flood control space behind Roosevelt. It doesn't happen very often, but we have to evacuate that water within 20 days. Yep. And the thought is, if we could extend that period maybe to like 60 days, 90 days, you'd slowly release that water through the valley, which essentially replenishes the aquifer.
Yeah.
I would concur with Sarah. I think having these listed as projects convey something different, and I think putting it, recognizing it in the text as regulatory, statutory, or operational impediments or things that need to be considered.
And we could call them considerations. Yeah, that would make my report back to my board easier to say the state's looking at throughput issues on the CAP. So I'd appreciate having it mentioned in
and
the
the funding has already been found.
It'll be the same. Yeah.
It'll be a good report.
Just recharacterize it, because I think they're all important points.
They should go somewhere else.
We're just going to have to recharacterize them not as projects, but to help augment these projects or challenges. Considerations,
because they range from regulatory fixes to
operational fixes.
So we'll strike these from the fact sheets and
as projects.
And have a narrative.
I like considerations, and you could break it out regulatory, operational, and I think that would cover the list. Operational would be CAP and SRPs, the Roosevelt and CAP canal, and then the regulatory other items.
And then you can say that there's a process underway in CAP to resolve that, the DMUS agreement and capacity planning type of thing.
Yeah, we'll help you draft that.
Okay.
Could I ask a question about your Roosevelt flood storage capacity? What is the logic behind the 20-day rule?
It just follows the Corps of Engineers' expectations and their manual when it comes to dealing with flood control space.
And other folks are looking at it now that we have better forecasting techniques to say we can use that to help kind of mitigate the risk that would be associated with flood control space.
And is there a dam safety issue associated with that?
Yeah, no, we even have...
It's actually above flood control space, we have the safety of dam space.
Safety of dam space.
That, of course, would be uncompromisable, but there's that flood control below it.
Okay.
Yeah, so the theory is that when you're in flood control space, and this is true for all the reclamation project reservoirs, that you're nearing that that no-fly zone, so you need to make room for an unforeseen event.
So it means,
Right about forecasting.
it means the system's full, and then it means that you had another storm that got you into flood control space, and then it means that you have the next probable maximum flood on top of that. So the probabilities of that ever occurring, very, very,
Yeah.
very
We
low.
wouldn't be using it for permanent conservation, but as Bruce was saying, more just for a slower release.
Slower release. There are other reclamation projects that are evaluating the same
Yeah, I was
thing.
gonna say, are they, like, sitting on Alamo Dam is looking at that too?
I don't know if Alamo is, but I know
So
there's
this sounds very familiar.
I know some folks in California are.
California.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's California.
Some of the earthen dams have
Control
concerns about,
Sorry. Corps of Engineer.
some of the earthen dams have concerns about stability if they're saturated for too long, so, but it obviously, no,
Yeah.
don't have that issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next section, programs that could be developed with interested parties. You want to discuss any of those generally before we jump into specifics? Some? These are all ideas that have come up at various points in time that provide some benefits. Some of them are enablers, like some of the others were that we just talked about, regulatory enablers. If not, we'll just jump into them. First one, firm water supply for lower priority Colorado River water users. And this is one that Maureen had an interest in. We generalized it from what she originally requested to make it not specific to her particular situation. But the idea is where there are meaningful benefits to take higher priority Colorado River water and from a lower priority water use, that could be done.
Can we change the title to include firm water supply for lower priority Colorado River water users? So in the strictest sense, that means CAP as well as P4 on just, and the volume 10 to 30,000, is that per project?
That was what we thought could be a reasonable range that maybe would be negotiated.
For one transfer?
For one. Certainly could be different, but
Okay.
So you think that text should be added per transfer, not total?
I think people, which, yes, that would be helpful, because right now folks are on different sides of an issue, might read it different ways.
What's the
Wondering
change?
if you want to keep the canal.
under water yield, we'll just say the 10,000 to 30,000 acre foot per year is per transfer.
Be delivered somewhere.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are places in Arizona that are not currently served by the CAP canal that think this is out there for them, too.
So, yeah, because, I mean, couldn't that, the areas that are considering that would be through an exchange? Is that what you're saying?
Or they see the possibility of an extension of the CAP canal so that there would be some kind of exchange that would wind up meaning water delivered. The other, to that same question, fallowing isn't the only way to free up the water supplies. So I don't know that we even want to specify how the water would become available, but instead just say a transaction to deliver water, you know.
So just trying to make the linkage between the fact sheet and the map.
Are we listed?
Which, oh, we're back.
Yeah, no.
I think,
Let's see. And we're not even a high priority water user. I don't understand why that's even there. Yeah, but that's not us.
They're not the
That's not us. Yeah, that's them.
So you may want to strike SRP from the partners.
As partners.
I mean, we're just having a sidebar.
Yeah. We're not a high priority.
On the partners, okay.
so just a general comment that I would make, Richard, on some of these where you have benefiting planning areas, the maps don't match what the fact sheet says.
Okay.
The symbol isn't.
All right. Any other comments on this one?
This one will draw some attention.
Okay.
Folks on the,
Well, when the report is issued, I'll make comments.
Just wait. So,
There's no way we can shape this any differently than it is now.
Right.
This will be very offensive to a number of people on the river.
So,
Is there a reason to withdraw it for that reason, or do you want to keep it in?
This side of the table would not agree to that.
I'm neutral. What about, for example...
I don't think that's fair.
Well, we mean that we have the water and you don't?
but I think the reason Maureen wanted it added was for the possibility of on-river exchanges as well, not just off-river.
No, I really think we leave it in. We leave it in. We need to leave it in because it's a discussion that has to be had, and you're hearing that from Wade Noble.
And it's being recorded.
And we cannot preclude that in this report, or else there'll be a whole bunch of people that say, well, why didn't you talk about that as far as augmenting central Arizona's water supply by moving water from somewhere else. So looking at it from that aspect, I think this puts it in play. It's obviously in play. You can't hide from that. You can't ignore it. The elephant done in the room.
Okay.
But we also have to remember that, you know, the Crits talked about doing deals, have talked about doing deals, and that may not be so offensive, for example.
And they're doing deals, yeah.
Right, and that isn't necessarily following deals. And I mean, we don't want to just assume we're going after agricultural water.
Irrigation district.
Yeah, irrigation district water, right.
That was going to be my question, because it says to voluntarily and temporarily foul.
I'd say get rid of that.
Because, yeah, there are other
Exactly.
non-ag uses on the river that someone might be
potentially
for use.
Yep.
Yeah, I've taken out.
That's where I was headed back to.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, if it's in here, there'll be those of us who say, you're encouraging it. And that'll be hard for us. But I don't think we can get away from that particular aspect of it. It is what it is.
Okay.
I would also,
Any minute.
think about the time frame. 10 years implies that it's something that we need to.
How about 0 to 99?
Well, that's kind of where I was.
That'll be 10 years after Chuck's dead.
Well, I can go 0 to 60.
Good run, Chuck.
I'm only 29. CCP did this to me. Yeah, but I agree, because we don't want to imply that this is the imperative of the committee.
Right.
That we have
It
to
should
do
happen
this
first.
like right now.
Yeah. Yes.
We need to breathe.
This is a long-term water augmentation.
It might be,
that's my point.
instead of years, as in the conservation, there's text that says any time instead of numbers. Maybe this should say something that acknowledges these concerns, that like, you know, when a willing party emerges, or when the opportunity arises.
You know.
I know.
I'm not sure, Sarah, that I agree with that. I think as it's stated,
It's okay.
is neutral enough.
So 0 to 60, or time frame, or something.
Or any time.
Yeah, I
Take care
would
of
think
that, or any time.
50 to 60 years ought to be the...
Any time.
Okay.
No, starting in 50 years, we would look at it, and we would look at it for a 10-year period, 50 to 60
In 50 years after we have all those ocean desal plants up and running.
No, just 1 to 60, 0 to 60 is fine.
Okay, so you're saying it should only show up on the 0 to 60 map?
I think that's good.
Okay.
If you have a one that starts in 50 years out and goes for the next 10 years, the 50 to 60 year period, that would be a good place.
I didn't see that map. 50.
Okay. Project 11, West Basin Alluvial Aquifers.
I'm sorry, before we exit the authority of the bank needs to be expanded. What's the role of the bank in this?
Maureen was thinking, like a high, someone that oversees whatever, farming, kind of, like a neutral party or something.
Yeah, that's exactly, I think that's exactly right. I think it was like, if we are truly talking about firming, could the bank be the entity that is more of a third-party objective? That was the logic.
So that, how does that marry with the idea of the agreements between two willing parties and all of that? Is the bank the willing party? I'm just,
I think they were more of the, almost like the escrow agent
The facilitator.
between two parties.
That's gonna
Well-
a bit of a conversation.
Well, and
I mean,
could it also not be just like interstate storage, right? Where it actually came in and was stored?
Yeah, I think didn't one of the last papers even say something like stored in Arcuela or something?
Right, so it could be
Wasn't even-
direct delivery, or it could actually be stored firming, just like their other firming credits are stored by the bank.
Maybe. So, a lengthy.
What would be the alternative, Chuck, in terms of who kind of manages this or oversees it?
I think the way a number of cities have talked about it has been that they would use the system use agreement as a means to self-firm, using their own resources to secure drought option agreements types of transactions. Maybe that's a stale conversation, but a couple of years ago, that's where folks were headed, rather than tax base.
But I think
The concerns that have been expressed about the benefit versus distribution of 4-cent.
So if a city does it itself, I mean, I think it's a different situation if it's an on-river community that has the water actually stored in central Arizona, because there has to be obviously a way for them to recover that off the river versus somebody who... Right. Right, so that's why I'm saying it's different than a municipality self-firming, because they're bringing it in. It's most likely going to be in an AMA in which they're in, or through an exchange. It doesn't have to go back somewhere. So I think that was the role
And I don't know
that I think
the whole
what she perceived
concept.
it being would play. I don't know.
Just a facilitator, I don't even know if it involved, property tax. it was just, we were just on the third party that,
I don't know how important that is for this concept to be articulated.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's not an imperative.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's saying that you'd want to look at,
A range of institutional
right, yeah.
approaches.
Yeah.
Should we generalize it to just say something to the effect that, you know, these kinds of agreements may need some sort of an escrow agent? Or just take that sentence out?
I think we do.
Yeah, I'd follow Guy's
Everybody will
suggestion.
figure it out.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
you know, what we could do, just, into water services agreements, right? So banks would be a partner in for that, right? So.
You can leave it in there, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, with existing authorities.
Right, I mean, we
Yeah.
can do some of this right now, and it doesn't involve 4-cent tax, it's just water banks storing water on behalf of.
Sure, I mean, we're already doing that and have been successful. And we have exchange agreement, well, I mean,
We
I'm
haven't
thinking,
really not had
well,
one.
no, you're right about the banking services agreement, but certainly for the exchange agreement with Mojave and, you know, as a way to get the water back to them, because you store it, they pay for storage.
Well, we pay for it. We don't have that kind of money anymore, but, but we can do water services agreements.
Right, yeah.
So, and that would become a fund that hasn't been identified.
Right.
But, I mean, I would still keep the water bank in there as a potential partner. I agree.
And that's fair, it's just a conversation about expanding the authorities.
Yeah.
Can have unintended pushbacks. I didn't say that.
The only thing that I think I might add in, it's not exactly a permit, but even lease agreements do require a recommendation from DWR with regard to the transfer. And I don't know what the VOR approval process is with that.
Don't they get
So
a
for
seek?
on river, I guess I'm not aware of any weeds of, I was just thinking about actual conveyances, assignments or conveyances. DWR makes the recommendation to Bureau of Reclamation, and then Bureau of Reclamation either
Accepts or they do their own
then they have
thing.
to reissue a contract. But for a lease, we've never done one, so I don't know. I mean, definitely,
There's no that's new territory on Section 5, on Section 5 contracts.
so there might be.
As well as Arizona surface water statutes. All we allow, you know this, the only thing we can do is exchange. Only tribes have congressional authority to lease.
So I think that, I don't know if that would go into a permit or if that goes.
Regulatory changes?
Well, it's not even necessarily, I don't know that it's necessarily a regulatory change, it's just a regulatory provision that
DWR.
you have to apply to DWR even for, well, that's for long-term leases, so I don't know.
Is that because of,
There's no such animal in Colorado River, long-term leases, right? So maybe I missed something. What are we talking about? Who's leasing water?
Well, it says execute an agreement to deliver, and it says temporary, so that's a lease. I mean,
It's
I don't know if it's long-term or short-term. Well, that's what Quartzsite, I mean, the GRD wanted to do a long-term lease of Quartzites.
and we didn't test whether the efficacy of that concept. We haven't done it.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a lease. So that's why I'm saying I don't know what the process is, but I think there has to be, I mean, this is through a lease agreement, right?
So fallowing to date I'm hung up on the word lease. There are long-term agreements on how parties use land, and parties get paid not to farm. They aren't leasing their water. So the Palo Verde agreement between Met and Palo Verde Irrigation District is a right. The farmers got paid and had encumbrances on their ground, and the water flows to Met through priority in the quantification settlement agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just,
How would it work?
it's a technical thing.
How would it work with how would the Mojave Irrigation District agreement have worked?
There was a rotational fallowing
Right.
agreement, and the district would have been paid to enroll farmers to not use their water, just like we paid Yuma Mesa not to
Yeah.
use
I guess
their
what
water.
I'm asking is what would be the mechanism, and I'm thinking more like the legal mechanism, by which that water would then become available to the CAP or to the GRD?
So in
the court side, it was a proposed long-term lease.
yeah, and nobody got a chance to test that. It was a brand new
Yeah.
thing. For the Mojave deal, the idea was that it would flow through the priorities and CWCD would make an excess water policy to get the P4 water to the GRD. For firming, for the CAP system, it would flow similarly. CAP would pay farmers not to do something. The water would flow into the priority scheme. CWCD would use it as project water, filling senior users first, NIA, all that.
But any kind of on-river would have to be recognized by the Bureau, because I think that's exactly what Maureen envisioned. And so the whole question is it for firming off-river, or is it a temporary direct use? Because if it's a temporary direct use on-river, there would have to be some kind of...
You have to have a transfer.
That's what I'm saying.
And I'm trying to agree. I just bristle at the term lease because that's not a thing yet.
Exactly, and that was the point I made. It's not a thing yet, but we need to recognize that if it is a thing, there's going to be a process that's going to be associated.
Right now, I would identify it as an impediment. Unless you're doing rotational fallowing, you're stuck in a transfer loop. And we haven't had a transaction where the transfer goes back.
Correct. But it is, in DWR substantive policy statement, we have a provision, it has never been utilized, but a way to address one that would go back.
And we didn't test it.
We didn't test it. So that's the only point I'm making.
Sorry, I
Within the Mojave
misunderstood.
County Water Authority, I think that they could accomplish that type of exchange or use agreement without using anybody else, but going through the authority. And the folks, and it would be MDIDD, would need to not be using the water they obtained through the authority that they have under their long-term subcontract.
If the willing seller and the willing buyer were both within the Mojave County Water Authority.
Correct.
But if they
It's
weren't.
that area.
Right.
You are at a bureau process.
So that's what, I was just trying to say, there could be a bureau process that isn't articulated here under permit status.
I would identify it as there needs to be, and it doesn't exist currently.
Yeah, so the only thing is USBR approval for safety system use. But depending on the nature of the deal, there might be DWR and other BOR approvals that are needed.
Okay. Should we move on?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We've got an hour and a half.
Well, I do want to point out that I think the challenges 1 and 2 are the same challenge, just viewed from different perspectives. So I have some other places here where I think I'll just send you some comments on the draft.
Sure.
If you see fit.
Sure, okay. The next one is to more fully develop the West Basin alluvial aquifers to accomplish a variety of purposes. And this is another one that has been separate and has been aggregated, and if it's confusing, we can do something different. But with the idea that those West Basins could be used for a variety of purposes. They could be used to store water when it's available and recover it at a later time. You can recover groundwater there and deliver to the Basin Range AMAs, and I know that there are entities that are working on doing just that. And those entities that are doing that have also suggested if they have contracts with others to deliver that water to them, they're also open to firming agreements to help to firm those water supplies. And then the other item on the list is there value here in using that as a storage and recovery mechanism for the CAP canal in a way to maximize utilization. So what are your comments?
So my comment, first looking at it, is this is one that I think is somewhat difficult to smoosh them all together because even the transportation requirements for the 3 basins are very different. And you have rule or regulatory changes as none. And so currently, right now, there's nobody who's legally able to transport out of McMullen. The statutes were very specifically written, and neither of the 2 entities that are recognized even exist anymore. So nobody can transport out of McMullen without a regulatory change. Butler Valley is pretty much open. Harquahela INA is also very limited on who can do the transportation. So now you've also put actually bringing in other water and storing it there. So you kind of have 2 concepts here of using those alluvial basins as for recharge and then recovery. Where you storm recover water versus actually transporting groundwater. And I think that those are going to be different. I think the last thing is then on benefiting planning areas, you have a lot of the non-AMA, so one can maybe take water to go there, but under the
store the water and then bump it out.
It can't go to those planning areas.
De-water those aquifers.
So this one might need to be split out into multiple ones if you're proposing different things.
Okay.
So you could transfer water out of these basins.
Yeah. Well, there's legislation happening right now to increase the amount of water that you can get out of Harquahela by decreasing the pumping from 1,000 feet to 1,500 feet.
Okay.
And also to include private water companies to be able to transfer, not just public.
Is that actually moving, Warren?
It moved out of committee. I don't know what's happened since.
It's waiting for committee to hold vote in the House.
That's what I thought.
So that seems like a yes.
But that's just Hartwell-Haley. So that's my concern about lumping them all together and then lumping both using them for recharge and then pumping out at a later date versus groundwater transportation, I think
Yeah, I think.
tough to put it all in one.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there a need to look at the West Basins as a recharge and recovery vehicle?
You mean for the whole project, this whole report?
Yeah.
I have the same question.
It strikes me as overly complicated, and if we focus principally on the groundwater extraction and delivery, it simplifies it, simplifies the things that Jerry was talking about.
Okay.
So if we could re-envision what those alluvial basins could be used for, conjunctive management, would that not be better than what the current legislation allows?
Well, it's interesting, it's sort of like the Wayback Machine, right? The 78 study on the West Basins as a way for Arizona to store Colorado River water, CAP water, while the demand on the CAP system grew, was, one of the original concepts in the CAP system. Sorry, now I'm on a history tangent, which is that led to, once folks figured out that certainly in a couple of the basins, the areas close to the canal had confining layers, so you needed to put infrastructure a lot further up the basin to get them in, to get the water in. Anyway, all that thinking generated the recharge program in central Arizona, just moved out of those basins to the AMAs. But are we really thinking that we would store desal exchange water in McMullen Valley? We might do it 50 years from now, maybe, but only after you put the groundwater extraction infrastructure in. So it's a follow-on. I mean, so if you go out, you pump a hole in the aquifer, and realize that perhaps it's not, the sustainability isn't what we thought it was, then maybe you put a sustainability program in there, expand the authority of the water bank to replenish. I'm just trying to simplify. Either keep it, but as a separate project, or delete it.
I don't see it as an augmentation.
I guess it's feasible. Now, whether you do it or not is another thing, but, you're going to have limited recharge sites throughout the AMAs, as you know. So, yeah, maybe, but
I'd break it out.
But here's just another opportunity potentially to do the conjunctive management of maybe developing some additional recharge sites further west, develop another reservoir from God knows what water supply.
Well, that's the issue. I mean,
but again, we've talked about desal and introducing desal. I don't know, is it desal? I don't know. I guess what I'm thinking is, yeah, it's a reach, it's a stretch, but it's feasible, correct? Yeah.
It's a project that's feasible, that's about storing water that when really we haven't really got to any, we're not even, we don't know where the water would come from.
Right.
So it's...
But you can pump out of those basins today.
Now, exactly.
So maybe one way to manage that basin is, we'll pump out of it now with the full intent of it,
finding more water to put in there.
Potentially, yeah. But...
When I read some of this, what were we talking about if water becomes available, if you could reopen Vidler or something? And, I mean...
Well, yeah, Vidler is there, and you've got a lot of water stored there. There's a lot of water stored.
I didn't know if that was...
So Vidler is certainly looking to
market that water.
Yes.
Yeah.
For decades.
Yeah.
At least a decade.
Yeah.
Well, my daughter's 20, so almost 2 decades.
All right, so it sounds like just keep it simple, just focus on the groundwater extraction, which is already something that we're just thinking about and talking about. And then, do we want to create a long-term, like a 0 to 60 on replenishment of the basins or for continuous use?
Potentially as another reservoir site, but you're storing it underground.
With new water?
Yeah, I don't know what the hydraulic,
I
the
think that could
geology
be
is like.
noted somewhere. It's not, it's one of those things that's not really an augmentation project, it's part of an augmentation project. It should be noted somewhere where we talk about a real augmentation, and that would either be, that would probably be moving other Colorado River water,
Yep.
potentially ocean desal.
Right.
But it in itself is not
No,
a project.
it wouldn't.
We could go out and build another reservoir on the SRP system, but we wouldn't have more water. And that's what we're talking about here.
Is there no way
A lot more storage.
More storage.
Is there no way to enhance the watersheds for the basins to increase natural increase natural recharge?
You do have this tree here on this one, I don't know what else you said about that.
And we have the cloud.
Yeah.
We have the weather mod, and we have
Weather mod.
and we have the forest,
Restoration.
so restoration, though, is that the studies that I've seen
Okay.
don't suggest that
Yeah.
it's not a supply.
Not unless you're actively managing.
Yes, but if they're
Mhm.
thinned and managed, we have a study
Everyone has
that
a
shows
study.
that, there is more, actually, water quantity
Kind
and...
of quality I've seen.
And whether it makes it to the reservoir or
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Oh.
But we have a tree.
Should we move to Project 12?
You're right, it's just another facility that you develop, but you need a water supply for it, you're right. But there is groundwater and there is stored water out here.
Yeah.
That is.
This could be active.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Project 12 is the SRP CAP interconnect facility.
Let's say it's good to go before Chuck comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the bi-directional. Right now, we can take water from the CAC, we can't, especially new conservation storage water. And then also an opportunity to better manage some of the long-term storage credits that have been stored within our service territory. Now, the only additional augmentation is the fact that I think the valley cities are leaving a lot of NCS water stranded a bit, and they're not using their full entitlement, and part of that is because they just don't have the ability to move that water off project. So this could potentially
Right, so this would help.
help that. Yeah.
And is this one, thinking back about some of the other comments you've had about other projects,
Right.
do you want this as a standalone project, or do you want it merged into some of the others?
I'll ask the team. I'm okay either way.
Project are we on?
It's augmenting access to the supply, because right now they're not using it. Right.
Yeah, so it's augmenting.
It's making water
The
available in a
water's
new
already
area.
there.
Yep.
Yeah, the water's there, but no one's using it, it's evaporating.
Well, it can be used off project,
Right.
and that, in a way, it's certainly an augmentation to those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
It's an
yeah.
augmentation of
To-
use,
to-
it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
a-
A bigger supply coming in, yeah.
You still waiting?
You're right, it's a...
Yep.
More effective use of the water.
I have a question in general.
Sandwiches will be here in a while.
Oh, good.
In a while.
That was my question. And I don't know if anyone else has had the same question, so thanks, Wade,
We
for
want to get the
clarifying.
answer where everyone else has.
But where we say ability to finance, and there's, in different places you use high or medium, I get thrown each time I read that and have to think again, okay, what is it that's really trying to be said here? And it's also with the economic viability, high. Is high good? Is it, I'm trying to put a judgment on it, maybe I shouldn't be, but like on the ability to finance. Well, yeah, CAP and SRP could finance this, but it's still going to be a big expense. So I don't know if anyone else is getting tripped up over that, and I didn't know if it would just be better just to leave those terms off.
Okay.
But I'm just raising it because I don't know if anyone else has I'm not really, it doesn't have to be, I'm not demanding this or anything, I'm just raising the question.
This is another one where we've gone around several different ways.
Okay, sorry.
And so maybe we should talk about that generally, because I think you're raising points, at least for clarification. Originally, the original scope, it was cost efficiency. We agreed to change it to economic viability to try and make it a little bit more understandable. And, there was a high, medium, and low, where high is that today's municipal users could conceivably afford to pay for it, and then, medium is a little lower, and then low from there. But we've also evolved a little bit where we've sort of split some of the projects out by time as well, realizing that projects that may not be economically viable today could be in the future as conditions change. And so that was the intent of the economic viability. The ability to finance, the high is intended to be situations such as a municipality could afford to do it and decide to do it themselves, and they could go out through whatever financial means they use in borrowing money in the bond market or raising rates or impact fees or whatever mechanisms they have. It doesn't require something new to do, whereas if you took ocean desalination, for example, it has a low economic viability because of the higher cost, but ability to finance is probably going to require funding from some, at least at a state level, if not a federal level, because they're so big, and so it's a much bigger deal. So that's the intent of the variations. Maybe there's a different way to communicate it easier.
When we first started in the committee, there was a wonderful chart that we got to see that had some metrics, and they were more numeric, as I recall, instead of narrative, about that quantified that very issue, those kinds of considerations. So maybe we could go back to that and see if something like that would be more helpful.
Rather than the high, medium, and low.
Yeah, or
I'm wondering if it's okay with leaving off the high or medium and just have the description there. But again, I'm not wedded to it.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd raise it, see if it was anyone else having the issue.
I have been thrown off a little bit by it.
I think also there was initially a desire to try to somehow weight and rank all of these.
Yeah.
And that's where some of that came from.
Yeah, I do remember
Maybe
that.
we want to hold off on that then, yeah.
We've kind of moved away from weighting and ranking because there's a lot of difficulties in doing that.
So rather than just do a narrative then, kind of explain like there's a rate structure in place or there's financing mechanisms already available, those kinds of things when we're talking about each one of the projects, just a narrative about, or if there's no entity yet that would even have the ability to tax or anything, then that gives you the indication that it's going to be difficult. Right?
Yeah.
So just more of a narrative, you're thinking?
Yeah, maybe just, like an ability to finance on this one. Financing would be through CAP, SRP, and the water right holders that would use the facility.
Okay, if we can change that. I don't have any problem with that.
Go to 13 before Chuck comes back.
If you could just change that to end users of the facility instead of identifying CAP, SRP. Okay? Because I don't know. the connection. I don't want to put anybody in a position that,
Where was that comment you just made on?
under ability to finance, financing would be through the end users of the facility or something like that, something a little more generic,
All right.
you know. Because the cities maybe, okay. Right.
Okay. Next one is infrastructure projects for new source water. So these are, I'm assuming would be three of the highest interest ones. Brackish groundwater desalination. We've identified some locations based on studies for where that might be, and that's where the icons are on the map. We've assumed a yield of up to 10,000 acre-foot per year, just to try and have a size of a facility where you could put several wells and run them to a single desalination point. I don't know if you have any particular thoughts or...
How did you identify the places, the locations of brackish groundwater supplies?
They came originally from a study by Montgomery Associates.
We've been told that study wasn't really meant to be identifying.
You can use it.
Yeah.
It's been used all over the
Yeah.
state for a
Yeah.
decade. We just think that it's time to update it.
I see.
You know, the absolute numbers of quantities that are in there.
Right.
Not,
It's
not worth planning on.
Okay.
So,
You need
Chuck
more.
commissioned
Yeah.
it actually 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's time, it needs to be updated.
okay.
The general areas are
Accurate.
recommendations.
And we looked at another study that had some similarities in the areas, but it didn't...
USGS. Yeah. Yeah. We want to see if we can get them to give us. Maybe you guys have them. Maybe ADWR has their layers or whatever they have that's more grand.
The only thing I received from them was a populated report.
Yeah. Data layer.
Are there any other thoughts or things you want to discuss on this one?
A question. This one is listed as Project 13. And then on the map, or on the table, where it's listed for projects that can be completed in the next 30 years, it says Buckeye waterlogged area groundwater replenishment exemption. Is that,
Here's the number of issues.
because it, yeah, I see brackish groundwater desalination and replenishment exemption.
And that,
That in the original, or was that in those 5 that we moved?
the replenishment exemption is one of those that we addressed earlier.
Okay. Okay, so that was in the, those are the ones that were moving into the text,
That's correct.
so then it would be moved from the table also?
Yes.
Okay.
So this one, as it's currently written, is primarily an infrastructure project to do wells and desalination treatment.
So I guess the question I would have is the characterization of the economic, okay, so ability to finance, does that take into account the, I mean, I don't think most of the places that have been identified as potential brackish desal sites do have the capacity to bond a desal plant, just looking at the map. I mean, if we were talking about West Valley cities, yes, but if past that, it's a lot harder to imagine that they could bond a desal plant. So I wonder if that's an over-optimistic characterization there on ability to finance.
Probably, but that, you were just looking at, is this something that would be funded through a municipality as an entity? Making a judgment about can the municipalities themselves do that?
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that we can address in just a text write-up on ability to finance. It'll be general, so we're not necessarily.
How is it different from the ability to finance other municipal infrastructure?
Well, rural areas have a lot harder time financing infrastructure than cities. So that's what I'm referring, only the bonding capacity of these.
But we're also, for advanced treatment, for the reuse, it requires similar capacity.
Right, and maybe that's what this is bringing out, as has happened in past meetings, that the capacity of the big cities is much greater than in rural areas, and at some, we do need to acknowledge that in this report, I think, that it's not the same. If you're the West Valley and you need 1 million acre feet of water, you may be better off than if you're, up in Mojave County or some other part of the state.
Yeah,
so,
my point is that we should characterize the ability to bond equally for critical water treatment.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you. And maybe, and I think the describing how it would be financed gets rid of that issue. So I like that fix.
Okay.
If that's what we're moving to, then I don't have a worry.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the brackish desalination?
The cost seems higher than what folks who've deployed that have reported. $2,300 an acre foot is the ongoing cost for the Carlsbad desal plant, which is seawater, which has had significant delivery requirements included in that $2,300 an acre foot. So the estimates that we've seen in other analysis shows it between $600 and $1,200, including integration costs.
Do you have anything you could share with me so I can see that?
Sure.
Okay.
El Paso's an easy one, but yeah.
Well, again, this is one number that's a broad range, and if you have to go out and buy land and do evaporation ponds, that's one thing. There are other technologies, some of which are still being developed, that would make it lower.
Well, brackish groundwater desal isn't it's a landed technology, meaning the options for treating the waste stream, the brine, are well established. Depending on your goal, you can. This. So I think it would be interesting to better understand your numbers, because it's fully double the high end of what looked at in the desal work group.
Okay. Because I haven't seen anything around $600 an acre foot, and that kind of then begs the question: if everyone could do it for $600 an acre foot, that's even less than arsenic treatment, nitrate treatment for groundwater wells. I'm curious about what that information is.
Well, El Paso, just let's say the full name, the K. Bailey Hutchison desalinization plant, has an all-in cost of just under $600.
And that's a facility that's extracting the minerals and selling them?
No, that's the plant and the delivery to deep well injection in a 21-mile pipeline to Fort Bliss.
Okay.
They drop it in the Bolson Aquifer.
Okay.
Didn't know Kay Bailey's name was on that.
Yeah. Well, she was the key driver in getting the port to allow the pipeline. Something like Texas Senator.
I just viewed a document where Georgia's people put together costs that are way higher than that for us. That's why I'm struggling with that a little bit.
It was so inexpensive.
Well, again, it's equivalent to what San Diego County Water Authority reports, their cost to treat and integrate seawater. And the infrastructure and California permitting just suggests to me that brackish groundwater in Arizona is going to be
The cost of
less than that.
Also, the contract price.
Right?
So you
I
get
mean,
profit
yeah,
in there,
the
too.
profit built in for the private entity for Carlsbad, that's correct.
Yeah, and I've heard from them on that plant what the cost is at 2,300. Okay. Next to an ocean desalination with the Colorado River Exchange. And talk about that for a minute. I've heard different voices on the potential and the opportunity and the willingness of California or others to participate in that. And the idea with an exchange, if you look on the map for that one, in general, we stated that, for example, you could go to entities in the LA area and maybe negotiate something, or go to San Diego or down into Mexico. Each of them would be organizations where the state of Arizona would have to negotiate with them to take water from a desalination plant that Arizona would have to pay for and construct, and then in exchange take some of their water off the Colorado River and either use it along the river or put it through the CAP canal or do other pipelines to be able to convey that water. I don't think it necessarily means that you have to do it at one location. There may be multiple locations and multiple entities where you might be able to negotiate something.
Oh, I see what you're thinking.
And as far as the size of a project here, I was stating 600,000 acre feet. It would have to be big to be able to be justified and to have water that could maybe move around to multiple areas in the state. And projects 14 is one where you do an exchange. 15 is one where you just construct perhaps in the Sea of Cortez and then do our own infrastructure and not worry about doing an exchange. And then the other projects, the rest of them are all about either infrastructure or exchanges to be able to move the water to additional planning areas outside of the basin and range AMAs.
Well, the cost implications are different between the ones in California versus the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of California. We can offset the cost of the ones in California with the cost of moving that water from the Colorado River to Los Angeles.
Right.
Would have less cost in that case.
Yeah, doing in theory, the exchange may be less expensive. The one concern I have, and I think the numbers I have are low for some reasons. One is if you negotiate an exchange with them, they currently take their water from wherever they do inland where they have their CAP water, and move it towards the ocean, because that's the way their infrastructure is set up to deliver. If you then put a desalination plant along the ocean, they may need additional infrastructure to be able to move that water inland farther, and I don't have anything to look at what those costs would be. The other thing relative to them that I don't have anything in is, if you ask the question, well, why would they participate? They're not going to do it out of the goodness of their heart. They're going to want some other benefits as well.
It's a drought-proof supply, and there are cities that see that, recognize that, so that's something. Yeah, and water quality.
So those are issues that are not at all quantified in this at this point, but
Can I ask why 600,000 acre feet? Is that the max, or do you feel that that's a minimum necessary?
it's neither a minimum or a maximum.
Okay.
I looked around at the different planning areas and said, well, how much could they maybe use?
So
And I
adding
summed them
it up. Got it.
And it came up to about that. You know, whether it's 300,000 or 900,000, I'm not making any judgment on. It's just a starting point. It's a straw man target to shoot at until someone provides additional ideas or insights.
So, we, Department of Water Resources, when Gunther was director of CAP, have had conversations on and off with parties in California. And the thirsty Metropolitan Water District of Southern California seems to be willing to step in between an exchange and a desal plant for Arizona. Plus, this is a long time ago, but I doubt it's changed. When Director Gunther had a conversation with he was directed to talk to the California Coastal Commission about what it might look like to permit an exchange project, a seawater exchange project that would benefit Southern California and Arizona via exchange. And the California Coastal Commission said that they would have to look at the growth-inducing impacts of desalinization in Arizona. And you might expect that Director Gunther was not really interested in having a California regulatory agency look at the environmental impacts of growth in Scottsdale. So it's an idea that, I'm sorry?
Or Peoria.
Or Peoria. Thank you for that. Exactly. It's a moonshot concept. And I think we just need to recognize that. And you're exactly right that one of the impediments in the actual practical application in Southern California is the putting the water into the existing delivery system. And for Orange County and Los Angeles County, that means piping the treated water up to the regulatory reservoirs through urban and super urban California.
Slight power supply situation also.
Exactly. So I think that your cost is soft, given the implementation and integration challenges. 60 years from now, maybe. At this juncture, particularly given California's experience in the drought, where they spent almost $750 million buying turf, it seems unlikely that they would share their ocean with Arizona. That's the Coastal Commission's view.
I don't question the huge challenges of this. Part of what we've been asked, as part of our scope, is to come up with what is the next bucket of water for Arizona going to be. And we looked at less viable ones than ocean desal and rejected them.
Well, California coastal desal is different than Mexico in a substantial way. And as you're aware, people at this table are working very hard to develop a project with Mexico within the next 10 years. And I believe we're making good progress. And that cost estimate is more in line with Carlsbad or less. And it's an exchange, not a pipeline from the Sea of Cortez. I'm sorry, Guy?
Should we strike California from this?
I think so.
And with the cost of 2,000 acre feet, and this was the treatment cost of the
For Mexico, I would peg it to Carlsbad, just and Mexico, although they're telling us that inlet is there.
What did you say that with Mexico it would be pipeline or an exchange? I didn't.
I'm sorry, right, the conversation we're having with Mexico now is an exchange. So both the Sea of Cortez and the Pacific Coast, the Rosarito concepts are relying on an exchange rather than building a transboundary pipeline.
How much water could reasonably be produced or yielded from that Sea Cortez deal?
The study looks at
Rosarito?
200,000.
Yeah, 4 sites, 50K each.
Yep.
Total of 200. The smart people.
I'll add to that is the project scope, or the, I guess, study area is from Puerto Penasco south. I know this is pretty environmentally sensitive areas right up here. You might just want to move the symbol a little bit further south and towards Rocky Point.
Okay.
Yeah, because where you've got it right now is in the middle of the neck.
Is this desal looking at the Sea of Cortez and also Pacific?
In the minute, so we're doing one study right now for the Sea of Cortez. In about 6 or 8 months, there should be a study that kicks off on the Pacific side for Rosarito.
You're saying Rosarito, I thought, yeah.
But that one's going to be, just capacity-wise, it's probably 50K. No more than 100, because that's the capacity of the Tijuana pipeline. So the exchange for the Pacific Coast would be for water that Mexico delivers in the Tijuana aqueduct from Mexicali over the hill into Tijuana. For the Sea of Cortez, it's exchanging water in the, Morelos, yeah. So, that's, forget the main canal there, but, yeah, exactly, the Alamo Canal, for Colorado River water that Mexico receives at the northern international boundary.
Would now be a good time to eat lunch?
Sure. So are we removing Project 14?
Can you tell us what the process of...
That's my question. Do you want to remove Project 14?
The California option?
Well, the California
Or
option,
just
shouldn't
remove
we
California
leave in
from the
Mexico?
project?
Yes, we should leave
Okay.
in Mexico. I believe we should leave
Leave in Mexico.
Okay.
Take out,
So leave in Project 14, but take out references to California?
California.
Can I ask something about this?
Yeah.
It's probably not where you're going.
No,
so I
go
can
ahead,
wait.
go ahead.
I'm trying to envision what all these exchanges would be on the map that would happen if we got a supply of, if some cities in Arizona built a desal plant in Mexico and there was such an exchange. And I'd like to know how each of the marked spots that aren't what I just said ever get to the point where they benefit from that, or what's the exchange or the deal. I get it for Upper San Pedro, I get the concept, but aside from Basin and Range, I don't get the, maybe Colorado main stem, but like, what's the Verde exchange that involves the desal plant?
Okay, the idea there is that
Oh, okay, I should be reading it?
I read it.
Okay.
I don't know if it's clear enough for you, but it is.
Okay.
if we're able to get this water to an exchange, it could be delivered here to
And we'd leave water up there.
central Arizona, and then they could work out an exchange or an agreement so that rather than Verde having to deliver water to SRP, SRP takes that water.
Yeah, I get it.
And that's really what all of the exchanges are, is something of that nature. And where we didn't see an easy way to exchange, what we did was we did a pump station and a pipeline to deliver water to there.
I guess one thing that I'm wrestling with, I don't have an answer, is that it makes sense for our study that we're doing to talk about the ocean desalination potential. When we start, though, talking about the different infrastructure projects that could be related in the state to these projects, as well as building any pipeline from a desalination pipe up into Arizona, I know it's not impossible that could happen, but it's just hard right now to see the economic development in the places that are identified here to justify the cost that would be involved. And I'm wondering if we just kind of limit more the focus on I don't want to keep dangling out there the idea that, well, if we just build it, they will come and it'll all work out, when we might need to someday look at the fact of maybe we're going to have to look at
where we grow.
Yeah.
I have to say, and I think similarly, I don't think that Verde exchange would probably, maybe on a very limited basis it could happen, but I think there's so many environmental issues that could prevent something like that. So to be looking at this as a supply for growth, there are barriers that are, they may be theoretically possible exchanges, but there are so many barriers that, for example, in that instance, I think it'd be very, very difficult to, Warren, to be more specific. I think what you just said, I was thinking, there are theoretical concepts for extending the CAP down to Sierra Vista, but again, very, very difficult. So should there be some sort of filter through which, we go before we identify these as augmentation projects all over the place?
Are we the filter group?
Well, or do we, at least as a matter of, I think it's imperative that we highlight those barriers.
Right.
Let's eat lunch.
If I could say a couple words about lunch. Last week I sent an email because I had to get a head count in order to put this order in, and I sent an email that you needed to RSVP if you were staying for lunch, if you were going to attend, and if you were staying for lunch. That's why we have 17 sandwiches. Not everybody around the table RSVP'd. So I apologize, but it was really the only way I could figure out how to use Mr. Noble's money frugally rather than to buy a huge spread with a lot of leftovers.
Twice as many sandwiches.
Also, there's a little cafe right over there that, doesn't get my rating, but they do have food. And I will try to leave this door open for coming and going to the restroom and making phone calls and such. Recently, the department has secured that door, and I'll see what I can do to keep it open during this lunchtime.
And some of us only have a sandwich on
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you, Wade.
Thanks.
And
For the judicious
we have no idea what they are. They were supposed to be marked, and I apologize that they were late. They were supposed to be here at noon. They forgot all about them. And the only thing I got to say is there's one vegetarian in there that's reserved for So, if you see one, grab it quick.
Thanks very much.
Are you guys
Vegas tomorrow? Speaking of, thank you, very interesting presentation.
Well, thank you for attending. Oh. Yes, you guys found that. I was gonna pull those out.
You guys are fast. When are you gonna spill?
They put
Yes, that's right. Hey guys.
We're up on the red.
I hear the struggle of sort of vision. But looking back at the historic documents, we've done a number of things that were thought of as wacky ideas, like the West Basin recharge and recovery concept in the 70s. That's why I brought it up. Even though we didn't do it at that place, the thinking was translating to another.
Your water leader program in the
Critical. I don't mean
I think what we're struggling with is there was a clear directive to make sure that we're looking at all possibilities for all planning areas, however crazy they are. We all start with like, looked at this. And like our automatic flinch is we want to cut it, but we've brought things back into this conversation because especially like the decel, looking at other planning areas, because it's like it can't all be focused on
Central Arizona.
Exactly.
Yeah, these things, and there's a needle to be thread on long-term benefits, and that's why I started with telling the rural areas they just need to be conservative, not leave to do anything else.
I know.
Not
And we had a lot of pushback from our board.
So I understand, but that's like the constant like push pull that we're doing.
And so, but now, thanks all. Yeah, remember that? Yeah, we're shooting over the end, coming down the, How you been, buddy? Good. How about yourself?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going, got my plane tickets yesterday, going to Vegas for the pack.
Are you?
But I don't get out here until like 8. So we better not be out by Thursday night. I'm really pissed off. No, it's 2 weeks from this coming Thursday.
ASU better make nice when they went out. Or win 2 of the next 3.
They need 2 of the next 3, and then they need to win games. Otherwise, just watching them, they'll lose by 20 at home to Washington State, and then kill Washington.
I know.
Did anybody snag the vegetarian?
What's his name? The coach.
Bobby.
He drives me nuts.
He is a little bit.
Very
animated.
He is very animated. Sometimes it's like, would you quit yelling at the officials and coach your damn team?
I forget which game it was. I don't know if you saw it. He was yelling at something, and the ball flies off the court, hits him in the face. He falls over, gets up, and just starts yelling at the officials. It's just in his. That's all he does. That's his nature.
I would say that's
So.
I'm sure you talent. Oh, you got to get these guys to play better together, especially on defense.
Agreed. Well, and even on offense, I get the sense that they just get out of control.
Yeah, they're like,
They're getting to the rim, but they're just out of control. And then they can shoot 57%, but they can also shoot like 19%. I mean, I think a couple times during the Washington State game, I think the first half they shot literally like 20% in the first half.
Yeah.
And they were getting it because they were so much bigger and stronger. but they were just adamant.
What you got going on?
Is that coaching? You know, I would tend to think that there's something to that.
I've got to get my,
I think the good news is that most of these guys, I mean, I think they're all going to have to come back next year. I don't think any of them were so good that they could declare. So hopefully,
It's supposed to be Dort,
Oh, okay.
really,
yeah. I've heard
I
that,
don't know if he's done enough.
I know.
I mean, maybe, you know, they're all going to go and talk to their agent and make that decision, but
I agree with you. I don't think he's done enough either, but
I wouldn't.
but that's been the speculation that he might leave.
I heard that earlier in the season. I don't know, maybe. That's his call. But I've seen him. He's good.
Oh, it's big.
Oh, it's big. A lot of talent.
Big and strong. I was up there for a meeting like 2 or 3 years ago. Didn't realize back then 12 tournament was going on. Went up there for the meeting. You know, I go into my hotel room and I sit down and I see this announcement like Pac-12 tournament. Man, I went to half the meeting.
Right?
Yeah, I just walked up and bought something.
And it's
Yeah.
really, I've never been. That's what I've heard.
It was
And that's
great.
what I'm hoping.
And then what I did, she was chicken pot, and I went in and I sat in the seat I could.
Wherever the hell you want.
Because there's not that many.
There's not that many. Now, for the championship, did you go to the championship game? No.
I saw about we're in the semis.
Okay, that's what I'm wondering. I you know, because from my perspective, you know, if I'm up in Vegas, I might go to the game even if ASU.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard, one more thing before we start. So, now that I chased all the non-RSVPers off, we have plenty. And I think people just took half sandwiches, so please come and get some more. And cookies are over here if you didn't see those.
Ruth, if you leave, only take one.
And I'm done.
I don't need any more than one more.
There's no under on them.
So, looking at the time we have left, I have another meeting at 2 o'clock here at DWR.
I gotta cut out.
So by 2, not only I need to be gone, but I guess our room is gone.
Well, the room's not gone, but you'll be gone.
Yeah.
Richard, I have a question. I have some like wording changes, a few other things. I didn't want to go through it here to slow things up. Can we share those with you, or just send you an electronic version with some of the wording changes suggested?
Yeah, if you want to send me an electronic version.
Yeah, with
wording changes.
Yeah, with some thoughts on, yeah, okay.
Or write something and scan it, I'd be happy to take any of that kind of input from any of you, because I realize there's a lot of wording sensitivities, and I don't know what they all are.
Okay.
And so it'd be a help to me if you provided that.
Sure, will do.
Okay. And as far as the things that we have to cover today, I mean, we want to get through these. I think the next most important thing to talk about is the outline of the report and what is that content going to be, and how do you want that message. We've talked a little bit about the cost. There's a couple items there, and I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time on that, and that's something that may need to be refined. I know it need to be refined as we go through. I don't really have to talk about the maps. They're just here for reference. So let's jump in and talk about Warren's question that he had right before he broke. I think that impacts probably one of the biggest parts of the remaining projects that we need to talk about anyway.
Did you want to go something else on here, the agenda?
Good job.
Well, it was sort of related to projects 14 or 15.
Well, we kind of decided 15 yes, 14 no, is that right?
We take California off of 14.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, right, okay. Then we do an exchange. 15 is just we type it in.
Oh, 15.5, okay.
What just to reiterate, I'm just wondering, desalination is definitely something that we need to look at as a state. It has a potential. I'm not quite sure if it's the silver bullet that a lot of folks see it as, but it certainly needs to be on the list. What I'm nervous about is after 15, the list of 10 projects that are all tied with, particularly the ones that are tied with infrastructure. I worry that we're elevating the importance as well as the thinking that it is doable to do all of these projects tied with desalination. And I'm wondering if for this report, if it would be better to just end with the project 15, but then in the text reference that there is then the potential of looking at different
exchanges
and things in the future. I'm just not sure that the economic development that would occur in those areas would justify the cost for some of the infrastructure projects such as to the Upper San Pedro or to the Northwestern Basin. I don't want to seem like I'm not looking at the potential and seeing all what could happen, but I think at some point, I would hope with this when this water augmentation study gets out there, that it also leads to raises the question about, well, if this is what it's going to take to augment the supplies, maybe we do need to do more of the conservation. Maybe this isn't an area for growth. Maybe there's things like that, rather than giving them a long menu thinking that anything is possible. Does that make sense?
And one of the things I think should be part of that discussion is that we've also been given an expectation to try and help planning areas outside of the basin range AMAs. And this is an attempt, if we're going to do a big project, if there was to be help for some of them, how would that happen? And that was the logic behind setting some of those.
Well, we did, for example, brackish, I mean, if we took these exchanges out, the little arrowy symbol, what planning areas haven't got help? Who's left out? Because there's brackish desal, there's reclaimed water, there's a lot of coverage with the other augmentation proposals or strategies.
I think part of the issue, all those alone aren't going to necessarily meet and move forward, and you may need to import a new water supply.
Well, maybe you show that, hey, but this is the reality, it's going to be costing this much, and maybe
So isn't that our job, though, just to identify what could be done, and then it's up to those planning areas to decide? I mean, they can look and say, this costs too much, this isn't for us. Isn't our job just to identify?
Well, if that's our job, then we could be identifying a lot more. If there are no standards that we could identify, we could identify a lot more. I think hopefully it's a little more than that, because theoretically you could build a pipeline and bring water, at least desalinated ocean water, but theoretically you could pipe water in from all kinds of places. But we have already, in our discussions, sort of agreed that we didn't want to just put everything. For example, remember we took the Mississippi River pipeline concept out. Yeah. But that's a concept that's out there. For various reasons, we didn't think it was wise to include it, partly because we thought we wouldn't have credibility. But here, I think this is bordering on the Mississippi River pipeline, to have ocean desal identified as a solution all over the state.
So would you take the exchange out of all the areas, then? Just have it in the narrative?
Well, I don't think that, I should have a modest, maybe even a friendly amendment to your comment. I think that there are exchange opportunities that don't require infrastructure, right? And we should honor those. Upper Gila. There's already exchanges ongoing between the Gila River Indian community and upstream users.
Farmers, right,
So that's one that doesn't require,
Let me take that infrastructure. Go right ahead.
there are, the main stem is obvious, for those supplies.
Yeah, the exchange is different, and I was having more concern with the infrastructure ideas.
And so I was gonna take it in parts, right? So, for the ocean desal, there are exchanges that can occur without infrastructure.
Right.
And they're obvious, and you can figure that out. When you start having I think some of these infrastructure extensions to areas that have a current payment capacity problem, it becomes more challenging. A pipeline to Fort Huachuca is
a pipe dream.
Exactly.
It's also defeated by the community. They were asked to support it.
Right.
Yeah, to do the water
So you have
district.
an answer to some of the rural areas. You know, the question was asked and answered. And change up the verbiage I'm confused about. And maybe I was out
I
of the
think
room.
the idea is that SRP gives up Verde River water to
And then we
communities
take water
there
out
and
of the
take
canal.
desalinated ocean water.
Or your canal.
But
And SRP's at the table. So,
And that's always something that we could consider. You're right. Personally, again, I don't think that this is the panacea for all these potential options. I think this is additive. We've talked about what you can do from 0 to 10, 10 to 30, and then here's another one, potentially. So I don't see this, I see all those potential solutions to each of these planning areas, number one. Number two, just looking at the LA Basin and just looking at Phoenix and private land, I don't see anything that's going to stop growth and development, not unless you're going to use water as the mechanism to stop that. But at this point, there's really nothing. It's going to slow down growth. And 60 years from now, who knows what's happening in San Pedro? There are limits, and I think those limits have to be explicitly explained in here about financing and et cetera. I think, but to say it was considered as part of this document, I think that's appropriate. But there are limits, I agree.
And it'll be interesting because if you're trying to do a desalination plant in Mexico and you think you can get 200, 300,000 acre feet from it, and if the Colorado River situation is as bad as it projects, that water
may
goes to the CAP, M&I.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, but you protect San Pedro? There's a lot of dollars associated with that? Because now you're not extracting water out of the aquifer, but now you've got, so there's multiple benefits, not just, so I guess we got to be, we need to be realistic in the document, what the limitations are. I agree with that. That some of these are a stretch.
So, for example, the water yield on the previous project 14, I guess it is 600,000 acre feet. That's one of those things where I think that causes some concern because it seems extremely unlikely that Arizona would be able to obtain 600,000 acre feet. And that might be one place where we need to be more precise. And then I feel very uncomfortable with the optic of all the little, even though I get it, I have discomfort with the optics of showing a map where a mayor looks at this and says, oh, we're just going to have desal all over the state. And I guess I'd like it to be it's worrisome to me to look at that and think, we're gonna have, Gila Bend is gonna have be part of a desal project, and all these other places where that would benefit.
What's the consequence of not having options for rural parts of Arizona in the drug document?
I don't think that there are other options identified in other parts of this report.
Tough. I mean, I kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that, I'm certainly not the one to tell anybody how expensive or realistic it is to get 200 or 300 or 600,000 acre-feet out of desal, but if you are getting it, I mean, the concept of the exchange isn't too terribly difficult to understand. So it's, on the other hand, I don't want people in the, I like to retire to Clarkdale someday, I don't want to grow it, so, I mean, I
Well,
get
a lot of
it,
people
but,
there don't do either.
but this one, to me, a pipeline from the Mississippi, yeah, that's crazy, okay? To me, if you can get those types of numbers, this isn't as crazy as that, and so I'm not sure what our charge is as a group to make those kinds of decisions. I just...
How about we have a list of everything that's possible, but then list the priorities of the ones that are doable, or likely doable. So we don't leave out anything that was maybe looked at as an option for planning area.
Or have a symbol, do that, what you suggest, Chris, through the symbol, like the color of this, the white circle is yellow or something.
red.
Yeah, pink. But I do think we could at least indicate that it's a lot harder to imagine a new CAP going to Gila Bend than it is to imagine the West Valley benefiting from this.
So what's the basis for that? Chuck's opening comment 3.5 hours ago was, don't put cost as the most important ranking criteria. Things like reliability and emergency growth might be more important.
But the capacity to build the infrastructure is really a big driver here. And that, we have struggled to pay for the CAP. I mean, our population, go back to 2004, and you can see that we have struggled as a 3-county service area where we are to pay that loan back. And if you know that history, then thinking about building any pipeline, you think that's really a challenge. That's really a big challenge. So that's the thing. I think there's too little recognition of how expensive and difficult it is.
So, I appreciate very much the challenge that we faced 25 years ago on making the first repayment, and the governor's the governor's CAP task force 1993 and 1994.
How about the multi-party agreements in 2004 to address agricultural users?
The settlement was $650 million by writing down debt and providing that to rural customers. That wasn't an issue about repayment. We solved that in the early 90s. That issue was about equity and getting value for the infrastructure and differences of opinion of about $1 billion on the repayment. But it wasn't about whether we were going to pay or have the capacity.
I don't mean that there was any doubt about whether the Phoenix area or Phoenix to Tucson area would have capacity to pay. But
so I think just to finish the thought here is that you bring up a vital point. Where every regional scale infrastructure project faces a gap between the outlay to pay the infrastructure, to actually build the project, take on debt, and a gap before there's a population to repay that, because you want to build your infrastructure before the demand crisis occurs. And I think you bring up a very real issue, which is, depending on the size of that gap, you can bankrupt a community, a county, or a state by proposing and building something and nobody has the ability to pay.
You can mothball a desal plant, you know, which
Well, the United
happens all
States
over.
can.
Yeah, well, Australia has struggled keeping desal plants operational, so
As does
it's not,
Santa
it's not
Barbara,
only,
but
right, and
Santa Barbara's
Florida,
rich.
and Florida. So that gap is the issue, but my only concern is, it goes back to what Wade was saying, who's our audience? If we think our audience is in part elected officials and people who aren't going to read more than the executive summary, then there's a risk that they would look at this and say, that's it, that, you know, this is, the solution is the desal plant. And that's my concern, that we don't sufficiently call out the challenges for these places that won't, where that gap is potentially, you know, catastrophic.
Well, I think that needs to be described, and you've mentioned it to me a few times, and I totally get it. But for some of them, I mean, I don't know, it's hard for some reason I don't want to take these things off either. I don't know why, I feel like I should. I feel like if I go back and tell my boss I left these on, he'll be mad at me, but
I think when we first started this, one of the big things that I thought we were trying to say is we're not deciding for any of these planning areas what they need to do. It needs to be up to them, and we're just identifying what could potentially be done. Granted, some are going to be easy, some are going to be very expensive, and they should recognize this is too expensive to do.
And the longer you forecast out, the more the uncertainties come. So, we have to be sure that in this report, we're very upfront about the challenges associated with some of these options. But if you look at most of those exchanges that are located on there, people have already been talking about them. It isn't like others haven't thought of these suggestions.
And you know, the CAP light, or whatever that Pinal County pipeline call it. You know, the I-11 corridor is a thing.
Yep, exactly right.
And there will be houses out there, as you pointed out.
There's nothing.
I think some of it goes back to, this is somewhat related to the earlier conversations we had about water conservation and about the programs that could be developed with interested parties. The list of regulatory, statutory operational changes, if you did those. And I'm wondering if what some of this is that we're I'll admit I'm hung up on this 25 different projects. And what I'm wondering is, without knowing exactly how it's all going to work with the text, rather than, I agree, we need to identify them, but the way that we're identifying them at the same level as the other ones that we're saying could be used. And I'm just afraid that gives them more
validity
than what we're trying to say at this time. Whereas the focus should be on, hey, if we can get the desalination, great. This is then what could come from that, and list them that way.
So parsing it, so if you have a water supply in the Colorado River system, a new supply for Arizona, and you want to add
add value or to make that available to the north main stem north, you're going to have a distribution system, right? But it only follows if you've done this other really hard thing.
Right. Right, and so maybe it's more of the way the text of the report is presented, rather than having this I'll call it appendix, that is at the end of it all. I don't know, that's just...
Yeah.
And I get your point, though, because then to Sarah's point about having straws and strung out all over Arizona can undermine what is a very credible.
Yeah.
For some readers, they'll say, well, that's wait, no, it's pipe dream. How do you actually demonstrate that there could be value, but it would be an even larger lift?
Right.
Particularly in these places.
Right.
I mean, some of them in the Verde, although I don't...
You're really falling in love with that exchange.
Well, I'm thinking, that one's easy. You don't need anything extra. San Pedro, some of these other, I think you could do it in a way that, I'm not saying ranks them, but explains the difficulties associated with some of them. Some will be much more difficult. I really do think we have to address desal, and it doesn't have to be this way, because it is a hot topic. People are going to want to know where it fits into this.
Long-term water augmentation.
Yeah.
Mr. Cullum will remember, I'm sorry, Chuck, will remember that there was a committee called the DSAL Committee under GWAC that worked on this.
Yep.
Yeah.
And in the end, we came up with two viable projects. And we looked at every possibility in the state, and we found two viable projects. So, yeah, we're putting a lot of pretty markers on there, but most of them have already been looked at from a perspective as, will these be viable?
On brackish.
Yeah.
Right.
For seawater, the allure of a seawater project is exchanging it to the main stem.
And Bruce can tell us about that allure. It's called Rocky Point Dye.
So those two that were floated to the top should be the two
That discussion's over. Let's go on to the next topic.
Well, we very easily, to the question of
we can laugh about it now.
Is everything on the table, we did cut out pretty easily California desal plant. On the, we heard from our expert that it is still within it's possible in the physical universe, but we know that it is not worth putting on. And that's what I think, we should make sure that we don't have exchanges here that are sort of in that realm, or explain that these are not all the same.
Just list them as possibilities and impossibilities.
Yes, and I really do. 2 weeks ago, I had an elected official wanting me to help him get the Colorado Basin states together to build a pipeline from the Mississippi River in Iowa to the Virgin River in Wyoming, so that we could benefit, so that Casa Grande could benefit, honestly. And when people still bring up NWAPA, when these big projects are conceptualized, they captivate people, and it does get in the way. I think it does possibly damage the credibility of the real doable project. And it creates expectations, and then people, when those expectations aren't met, they're very, potentially there could be blowback that wouldn't be good.
And I wouldn't want to ever suggest this is some silver bullet or is any better of an option than it is. But describing this might actually be an opportunity. Not that everybody's going to dig deep into it, but describing some of the things that we've talked about that aren't commonly understood would be helpful.
I think this is a good opportunity to do it.
Well, and again, I talked about additive, and essentially, we came up with, and I agree with you, Warren, we don't want to put more attention to this and the things that we can do 0 to 10 years and 10 to 30 years. But if you're going to be building, let's say, a pipeline to the upper San Pedro, you're going to be reusing all your reclaimed water. You're going to be employing every doggone conservation method that you can, and so that...
And you will resolve the adjudication.
You're not going to get there until you get...
talking about, and then if you still have an additional need, where are you going to get that water supply?
But the adjudication is a settlement issue.
Right.
If SRP wants to exchange water up in the Verde, they will offer a settlement package to all the allotted, wherever
participates.
Whoever participates, and it'll be a
I've
quick
never
claim
heard of
deed.
a thing like that.
Right, and then the state would just have to recognize it, and then, great,
Right,
we've
just
got a
like the
settlement.
tribal settlement,
Mhm.
right? And the same in the upper,
Right.
in the upper Gila.
Right.
Well, it would be BLM and Fort Huachuca and federal claimants, but,
Not on the Verde or the upper
but
Gila.
Upper San Pedro, yeah.
But yeah, if you go to the upper
Yeah.
San Pedro,
Yeah.
then, you know, it's a similar thing. You'd need the downstream user to stop.
So, but, so in my opinion, desalinations have been discussed, we've got an ongoing study going, we're gonna have to address it in this report. And for those options that we think may not be viable today and have a lot of challenges, we gotta identify that. But personally, I like the idea of having a variety of potential opportunities. Doesn't mean that they're viable and that but I think we need to include it.
Would it be possible to do a kind of graphic that captures what Bruce just said about here's what you probably are going to have to get done first? I mean, maybe there's a way of presenting that graphically that's kind of...
Yeah, I'm sure we can do that.
Well, I think, I mean, I agree with the sentiment that we don't just scratch them all off.
Right.
We need to still show them. It's just, it's giving them more attention than they need to. And that's where I had a concern with the 10 separate projects that are listed.
Yeah, I agree, that's fine.
Should we take those and just significantly expand 14 and 15 and just fold them in? Discussion of these are things that need to happen. We list them, if you look at
That would work.
Yeah.
Project 14, we just list them, we don't say anything more about them. But we could add several pages of discussion here to put enough in there so that they're all hidden underneath those projects.
You're not going to be able to get out that way.
You want to know when the next meeting is?
There is.
Nobody has gone by that.
Nobody has made it back.
Wow, it's really honoring you. This is the first time you've let anyone go by.
Well, and the other thing we can do, particularly in the...
I had to get up anyway.
The cost section, as we can state very clearly that all of those for the 0 to 60 planning period, we don't see as being economically viable today. There has to be some change before they would be economically viable and anyone would pay for them. Okay.
I think there's two ways, back to the cost issue, to show what Bruce was talking about. And what he was describing is the least expensive options are going to be done first. So that bar chart that shows cost or a range of costs will imply a higher chronological order of things getting done. And then the other thing is the planning horizon map. And I know this is something that Maureen really emphasized, is that if something has a long lead time, like you said, you know, if it's going to take a decade or two to implement, then the planning needs to start now. So I think that's how we ended up eventually dividing things into these separate planning chunks by decade.
Yep.
I would, yeah, and I think it's really helpful, and it would also be helpful to acknowledge that the state of Arizona is and has been undertaken by National Desal Investigations 2000. Anyway, certainly minute 323 is the impetus for the ongoing effort.
So we're years into the 20-year timeline.
And Chuck, I don't want to say back me on this, but Chuck will make sure. When we looked
stand behind you.
When we looked at desal, there were 3 things that you applied to every potential site, and they were, is power available?
Right.
Is the brackish supply sufficient to justify the project? And then number 3 is, who's going to buy the stuff?
Well, so you guys use filters that I guess we decided not to have those filters so that we could identify a project in every planning area, but those are like really sensible filters.
Well, they had a different goal, too.
Yeah.
That committee.
We were desal now.
I think we've been,
Their goal was to out.
Yep.
yeah. But this committee has struggled with what its objective is.
What? We have not.
Oh, yes, we have.
Let's take one step back on.
Yeah.
This meeting's a mission statement.
Okay, Richard, you're gonna have to leave pretty soon.
Shouldn't have skipped that.
Yeah, the one thing I want to get some feedback on is the report outline and what is the content you want to have in that.
Okay.
So we have,
Is that the only thing left that we have to discuss?
that's the thing that I think we have to discuss today.
Is there anything else that we should discuss? I'm asking, should we have another meeting?
Where the report goes out?
The intent is we have, this meeting is get feedback, we refine and come back to you on the 21st of March with what we think is the end of the technical work. And then beyond the 21st of March, we work on the final report. We do a draft first, we come and meet at a date that's not yet scheduled, look at the draft and go over those details with the idea of finalizing this study by the end of June.
Do you think we can resolve the remaining unresolved or undiscussed issues the same day you give us the draft report and include them in?
I'm envisioning 2 more meetings, perhaps.
Okay, tell us, and
One on March 21st, and then maybe a draft report time late April, early May kind of a time.
the 21st meeting you're looking at is completing what we didn't get done today? No?
Well, we can do that. We can also reflect back to you our understanding of what you've talked about in this meeting, and so you can tell us whether or not we got it right.
Okay. And that's on the 21st?
Yes.
Richard,
Anybody, what's your best guess on the amount of time we need?
4 hours.
Oh, you just said that, so you get lunch.
I didn't even eat lunch. I'll eat for lunch, though.
We promise you there'll be plenty of lunch next time, and it'll be here early.
Oh, we can always say 4 hours, and we don't have to use it.
Yeah.
Let's say 6 hours, that way she'll get the room.
Okay.
I could just book it for that long.
Okay.
On the 21st?
Well, I don't know.
Oh, is that the day we're looking at, though, Richard? You're looking at the 21st?
That's the date we've had on the schedule. We don't have to do that if that gives another day that's better.
What day of the week is that?
This year?
Thursday this year.
Oh, I think I maybe just accidentally sent you no? Did I just send you an invitation by accident? Yeah,
Do you have any
sorry.
flexibility around that? I mean,
Yeah?
that's not a good day for me. I'd really like to.
Oh, yeah. Ooh, I can't be here that day.
Yes, it is.
I can't. I mean, it's the CLE day.
Yay!
Yeah.
oh, there's committee meetings.
I can do the 19th, the 20th, the 22nd.
About the 25th.
25th, is that in this year, or?
March 25th, 2019.
Monday.
If you grab it quick.
It's open on my calendar.
Oh, that's a really important day. Why don't we do it on that day?
Is it your birthday?
No, not at all.
What day?
That's the last day to file ANZAC appeal. Let's do it on that day. We can all sit down here and wait. I can go down and see if they sent any in.
So you've got to come up here, be up here anyway.
No, I don't have to be up here for ANZAC appeals. If they don't file it, then we're done. If they do file them, then we go on for another round.
So the
March 25th?
I can do the 25th.
Okay, great. That would be great.
Start at 10?
If you just, I'm sorry if I accidentally just forwarded an invitation to you to a meeting
You won't be.
on March 21st. I deleted it, and so it should go away, but don't accept, please. No, no.
So we're looking at the
You won't be upset by the corner.
So we're looking
Please
to
be quiet.
ANZAC Day, the 25th?
Yes.
Richard, I'm wondering if, based on everything that you've heard today, if you would want to try to incorporate some of those changes into the outline, such as the whole discussion about finances? And would it be better if, I'm just wondering if it'd be better, based on the conversation that you've heard, if you resent this out and we then responded via email, or would you rather?
Well, I think that would be a good idea, because there's a lot we can refine on this based on this discussion today.
Yeah, because I was thinking of all the things that we were talking about and trying to figure out, well, where would we put those? And I'm like, that'd probably be better for you to suggest where they should go.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can do that.
If you have suggestions in your wordsmithing, as Bruce was wanting to offer you, when would you need those by in order to have this ready? And if you're going to send out prior to the meeting, it would be prior to the 25th.
Well, if there are notes that you've already put down and gone through, it'd be nice to get them within the week before you forget about it.
Okay.
If you need to go analyze some things, then maybe 2 weeks. It would be nice if you did it.
Okay. A week from today.
Yeah.
So get comments to you on this by a week from today.
Yeah.
And did you say 10 to 2?
Even said 10 to 4, but we're only going to be here till 2.
Okay.
Just by way of closing up, you may be aware of the fact that there is an IWACCGDEF or something like that that's been formed by Governor Keogh at his executive order. We anticipate that this committee will continue into that group. Yeah.
Chouwaki. Yeah, Chouwaki, with innovation conservation.
So we will continue. We may or may not have additions to the this committee, but we will continue. It is expected. So,
for Richard's sake, there should not be any additions.
Well, I wasn't at the previous meetings, but.
Don't know about the other 3 of the 4 that were in the original GWAC.
And that first council meeting, if you have not received my email announcing the save the date, it is March 8th. If you were on the prior GWAC and sitting in this room, then you should have gotten an email from me. If you did not, please let me know. March the 8th, 10 to 11:30, ADWR.
Can I just say, I really appreciate Richard and his team of putting up with us and all the work that you guys have done a lot.
That goes, that's from the whole committee.
Yeah, well done.
You're good at what you do, and they're pretty good too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Even if it was late.
I'm a little busy with Cindy on our.
We done?
Yeah, we're done.
You know, the pizza.
We done?
Pizza. Looking right.
Yeah. I'll go check. Definitely should. Well,
Good to see you.
are you a councilman?
It is. Good to see you.
On the state court.